All right. Hello. Sorry for being a few minutes late. I am terrible with time management. Um, just running around doing a trying to get my thoughts gathered because obviously there's a lot, and I was trying to rewatch the finale a little bit. You know, I watched some other reviews out there of it. Just trying to hear where everyone's coming at right now about it. Yeah, I'm still gathering my thoughts, but I think obviously there's a lot to be said today. Um, and it'll be a good chat. It'll be a good chat. So let me uh once again make sure that my correct microphone is working, which it should be. I should probably be able to listen. Listen. Hello. Hello. Okay. All right. The good microphone is working. That's good. I don't know why that didn't happen a chat or two ago. Um, but yeah, so we can get started. We got some people in here. Bushman Studios, hello. Ava Bandy, hello. I'm just gonna call you S19 for short. Hello. Um, yeah, so obviously a lot to get into. A lot to get into today. I will start, I guess. And once again, my hair is wet. I'm always like fresh out of washing my hair before I sit down to do these. Don't know why. Anyway, I guess I will start with my experience seeing the finale in theaters, which was on Thursday. Today is Saturday, so God, it's so funny. Time went by so slow leading up to the finale, and like now that the finale's over, time is just already moving so quick again. Like, because it was torture waiting to see how this show was finally going to end. It feels like I just saw it in theaters yesterday, not a day or two ago. Um, anyway, so I unfortunately missed the first 8 minutes or so because I suddenly turned into an old person who didn't know how to use my voucher thing because they sold the tickets in a way where it wasn't a ticket, it was, like a free concessions like no, not free, like a $20 concessions voucher, um, plus a ticket, and the ticket was like $0 or whatever. So it was weird, right? And so, obviously, I need my popcorn. So I was trying to figure out how to use this voucher, very embarrassingly at the kiosks, couldn't figure it out. They gave you, um, this like a terribly written, um, directions on a piece of paper aside of all the kiosks, and, I could not figure it out. It said, "Use it as a gift card," and I was like, "Okay, how?" But it wasn't until you check out that you select that option, and it took me forever to figure it out. Uh, but I needed my popcorn, and my mom is probably gonna hate me for that. She always tells me, she's like, "Brittany, you always miss out on everything because of food." And that's always the way it is. I always am prioritizing food over other things, and then I end up missing out on things. But I needed my popcorn, and so I got it, and then I made my way into the theater, um, right at the scene where Collie, Elle, and Hopper are about to walk into the room of the lab where the bath is. So, like, the second I walked into the theater, I heard Collie say, "You okay?" And I was like, "All right, here I am." I hated that I was that late, but because for me, like going to see a movie, like you don't really feel like you're seeing the full thing until unless you sit down, you get to see the opening credits and everything from the moment it starts, but, the beginning of the episode, having rewatched it again now when at home this morning, I didn't miss too much, it really kinda gets going right around that moment anyway, so it's okay. I did want to see the big, like, Stranger Things 5 on the big screen, like the title, but whatever, I have no one to blame but myself for that and my desire for popcorn, um, but other than that, it did hit very different, seeing it on the big screen, and also, like, the theater I went to, it was an AMC theater, um, and the screen was literally from the floor to the ceiling, like, not every movie theater is like that around me, I don't know about you, but, um, a lot of the theaters near me do not have screens that big, like, it would have to be, like, a special theater within the movie plex or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, only certain, theaters have massive screens, but it seemed like almost every casual theater at this AMC had a massive screen, so, yeah, it was huge. It felt like I was going to see it in IMAX or something, that's how big the screen was, so I was like, "Oh, that's exciting." I didn't realize that, so that obviously changed the whole thing. I was not expecting being able to watch an episode of Stranger Things on a screen that large. Um, so that was cool, and obviously the sound being so loud and obviously changed the whole experience. Um, there was a lady to the left of me in a Camp Nowhere shirt, and she was quiet, minding her business, having a good time. Then there was an empty seat next to me where these girls had a lot of their stuff piled up, including a box of tissues, and then they were on the 2 seats next to me after that chair, and, their reactions were a little bit interesting to witness to certain moments. Um, and yeah, I mean, I wanted to make sure I went, to see it in theaters, for the experience, the communal experience of, saying goodbye to the show, and it seemed like a lot of people in the theater had waited, uh, to see it in theaters for their first experience watching the finale, because this was the day after New Year's Eve, so I assumed that a lot of people were probably gonna be watching it for the second time as well, like I was, but it was clear that a lot of people were watching it for the first time, so that was kind of exciting to sort of be able to, you know, get that audience reaction, even though I knew it was coming, it was fun to hear everybody else react, um, and yeah, I mean, everyone was sniffling at the end. Everyone cheered at the end credits. It was a nice experience. But I will say, it was very eye opening and a little uncomfortable to hear people in real life, on the way out, chatter, um, talking about Kali. I did hear and first of all, I was saying, like, the 2 girls next to me as well. Whenever Kali was on screen, they were going like this. They were like and so I was sitting next to them, and I wore, like, my Lost Sister shirt, and I was just kinda like, "'Kay." So that was annoying. And then on the way out, I heard people chattering and saying like, "Yeah, I mean, like, no one really died. I mean, I guess the sister died, but, like, she doesn't really matter." Or like, "I guess the sister died, but, like, I don't care about her." And I was, like, hearing people say these things in person around me. And so that was, like, really weird, to actually hear people in person saying that stuff and not just, like, a random TikTok or a bunch of comments online saying those things. It was like, wow, like, out in the wild, it's like, yeah, that's what people are saying. So that was, Yeah, that was weird to experience. Thankfully, no one in the theater celebrated or cheered when she died, which I wasn't even thinking about that. And then as it was coming up, I was like, "Oh no." I was like, I will be real upset right now if I have to witness people in this theater cheering or like laughing or something." Um, but one thing the girls did laugh at, and some other people too, people laughed and did low key cheer when Hopper left Collie behind. And that was another moment that was kind of like, I was sitting there like, wow, okay. Like, I mean, and that comes back around to, the issues I had with how they wrote her character in volume 2. If there was just so they all they had to do was just make some slight adjustments, and I don't think that the response would have been that way. Um, I've gone over it before. I think all they really had to do was, write her into the group a little bit better, have, um, have the other members of our Hawkins gang actually value her, you know? That was their misstep, was that we have this the only other living test subject that we all know of, right? She appears suddenly. She's here offering help, right? And no one in our group seemed to care. That was a mistake. No one was like again, we've gone over it. She wasn't properly introduced to the group. That was a mistake. At least a scene where we could see, our main characters that everybody loves thinking, "Oh, whoa, like we have another, test subject, like that we have another 11 or whatever type of stuff they'd say." Or it's like, you know, where did you come from? Sort of moment. And have the group seem very appreciative of her or like in awe of her that she exists and her abilities, and like actually just make her seem um important and valued by our Hawkins crew. That alone would have done a lot of heavy lifting for her character. Because if you make it seem like the characters we all love couldn't care less about her, people are not gonna care, you know what I mean? So, that's the only thing, and I do feel like it was very bizarre. It was a very bizarre choice, um, to have another test subject superpowered asset, on our side, and everybody is just kinda acting like she's just there. They're not even paying her any attention. That was a mistake. So that's kind of the one thing, the one, difference, I would make, because I think that that alone just would have changed a lot of the, reception to her character and her death. Um, so there's that, and then obviously, like, I don't know if I would have had her die as early as she did. I probably would have had her at least be able to, participate in the final fight, at least for, like, a minute, like, at least have her be able to contribute, like, something to the final fight, and then eventually leave it up to Elle and Will to finish it. Um, but then you think, well, if they wanted to use her for that specific ending they came up with, then she would have needed to have been close to the right side up. She couldn't have died in the abyss. Um or maybe she could have been injured in the abyss and they bring her back and whatever. I don't know, but and then she dies closer to the right side up. I don't know, but I do just think that she died a little bit early and without, contributing probably as much as she could have. So those are the 2 things I would change when it comes to Collie's character. just integrating her into the group a little bit more, um, have our Hawkins crew actually seem appreciative of her and value her and her abilities and view her as an asset, and then wait a little bit to kill her off and, utilize her powers a little bit more. I think all of that would have helped. Um, but, you know, obviously we're gonna go over all of it, but, like, in the end, as you saw, like, in my, um, uh as you saw in my reaction, I was still ultimately happy with the ending, and I was very emotional about the ending, which we will talk about and dig into, and obviously I have since read a ton of theories, or not theories, a ton of, opinions on the finale, and I've heard a lot of different sides of the conversation, which we will dig into. Um, but yeah, off the top, obviously, you guys know I have spent a lot of time talking about Kali over the months here leading up to the finale. So obviously, just wanted to get some of those thoughts out of the way right at the top. And there's more to talk about too as we get into it, but that's pretty much all I would really change about that, but in the end, it is what it is. So, uh, Marlex24 says, "Yeah, she was just inserted in, like, no one asked questions." Exactly, it was weird choice, weird choice. Um, I do understand why Hopper left Kali behind. I mean, he couldn't carry both her and Eleven. True, but it did seem like he was going to leave her there, and he didn't decide to go back until Elle, you know, asked him to. Um, yeah, which some people groaned in my theater when she asked to return for her. So, yeah. Um, IHM 2025. No one in my theater cheered when she was left behind. People were sad, actually. I heard them. Well, that's good. Um, but yeah, that's nice to hear. But unfortunately, in my theater, it was a little bit of the opposite. But um, Kate Todd said, "It's bizarre that they did not use her in the final fight. It would have helped with suspension of disbelief in that final battle." Yeah, it also, just would have helped with her importance. You know what I mean? There's still a lot of the rhetoric of Kali being pointless. Why did they bring her back? There's still a lot of that going around. And also with the way the cliffhanger with Sorcerer left us, everybody started predicting that um, it was gonna be a big end game, you know, superhero moment with Kali, Elle, and Will teaming up against Vecna, and we didn't get that, you know what I mean? So, I mean, that's kinda like almost the bare minimum of what some people were expecting after her reveal, um, and then it didn't happen. Um, uh But, she still was able to help save the kids by using her abilities to help Mr. Whatsit tell on himself, to the kids about the truth of who he is, and I think it would have been, uh, pretty difficult to get the kids to believe Max after all of the lies that he told them. It would probably be difficult for, them to believe her so quickly. So Collie's powers kinda came in clutch there, and I thought that was cool. Um, alright. It's sad that Collie didn't get understanding and empathy like Elle did, yeah. And again, more to talk about with that later, but yeah, that's what makes me sad about it. But I have also seen a lot of rhetoric going the other way of people saying, like, she deserves an apology, she was misunderstood, like, there was a lot of that going around too. So that's why ultimately in the end, I'm like, well, maybe they didn't write her as well as they could have, but in the end, I think there was ultimately some good to be had there, um, and it wasn't a complete disaster in the end for her. It probably could have been a lot worse. She could have been a villain. If she was a villain, that would have been a lot worse. So, again, the bar was kind of down here for that, so at least that didn't happen, so, um, let's see. Let's see here. Spider Bat fan, hey Brit and everyone in the chat. Sadly, I can't stay. Just dropping in to say hey. Can't wait to catch up on this later. Hope you do another live again soon. Hey. Um, so S19 has a multiple part message here. Says, I have a bone to pick with you. I didn't catch the last few lives on time, but the 500 Days of Summer connection is not it. Will had to suffer parental abuse and bullying for being gay even before it manifested. And when he came to terms with it, he had to come to terms that his sexuality and gender also being the reason for his love not being requited, not his physical appearance, not his personality. It's a pain straight people will never understand. I know you didn't mean it in a malicious way, just trying to make an analogy, but that first queer crush is way more complex than that. Of course. I was just making the connection as far as epilogue boyfriend. That's where I was mostly coming at with, the 500 Days of Summer analogy of, like, I thought again, I also think that we could have gotten more than 5 seconds of epilogue boyfriend, at least a minute, I think would have been nice. Um, but it was still just the idea of, like, when just like a baseline idea of someone not feeling the same way about you, and then eventually you end up finding someone that is left on, like, a cliffhanger kind of like, this is gonna be their person, they're gonna find happiness with this person instead of the person that was wrong for them, the person that there is just that just doesn't feel the same way. That was where I was coming at with that, and the fact that it ends with an epilogue where it tees up that he's gonna have a future with this other person, um, who is probably going to be, you know, more right for him than the previous relationship was, or the previous person was. That's where I was coming at with that. Um, Obviously, the overall story for Will is very different from that. I totally get that. But yeah, it was more so just, you know, this person that you sort of fantasized about and had built up in your head is just and ends up not being right for you, doesn't feel the same way, and then in the end you end up finding the person that is right for you. Um, Collie and Elle dying together would have been much more powerful if they had made us care for her. Yeah. And again, it's tough for me because I already care about the character. It's just everybody else who doesn't. So, like, it's still hit for me because I've been more invested in this character than most at this point. So, yeah, but obviously, like I said, they really did need to make those few changes that I went over, in order for, um, audiences to care about her more, which is a shame because I do think they gave you enough in a way. They showed you her get captured, they showed you her friends get killed in front of her, they showed you, her have her hair shaved and her lose her freedoms again and be right back to what she fought so hard to get away from. They completely dehumanized her and used her as a human blood bag and all this stuff, and, people took her behavior, after escaping that place as being sus and being up to something when it's like she was just traumatized and tired, you know? And I think now that it ended and it turned out that, um, she was not a villain. I have seen the tide change to, all right, Kali deserves a bit of an apology. It's clear that, she was just as abused and traumatized as 11 and has gone through, tons of pain, never truly found love or, like a real family. It was clear that even her gang of misfits were using her for her abilities a lot of the time. Um, so I think her story ultimately ended up being a very tragic one in the sense that, she never even had anybody ever truly care for her. Um, and that's really sad. And again, it is sad to think that with a story like that, she still is not getting a ton of sympathy from people. Um, there I saw a thread on Twitter that was upsetting me, but again, like, I'm over it now to a degree. Like, I can't be as bothered by this anymore, um, because it's done, it's out there. As I just said, I think they gave you enough to understand where Kali is coming from, and now that, thank God, she didn't turn out to be a villain, it is up to people to, come to that conclusion of her, being worthy of sympathy on their own, you know what I mean? Um, but that's not to say it isn't still annoying to, see a thread on Twitter that says, you know, "Does Kali deserve an apology or something?" And then people in the comments saying, "No." Putting gifs that are like, "Hell no," and whatever, and it's like, "Nope, I got nothing to apologize for, still hate her," and it's like, "Why?" Honestly, at this point, why? And again, slight changes I would make too, because I have said that if they take just one wrong step with her, it's over. I've said people do not extend her the same amount of grace that they extend other characters. And um and we've gone over some of the reasons why that might be. Um but so gosh, I lost my train of thought again. Um, so yeah, so now now for these people who were haters, the way that they are, still hating on her and not giving her any sympathy or grace is that they cling to the things uh that they can still find a way to villainize her for. So, what are they saying why they won't give an apology to her character? It's because, well, she pulled a gun on Hopper, so no. That's a big thing people are saying. The gosh, excuse me, guys. The other thing is, um, well, she's the reason Elle's dead, so no. That's the other reason. Um, so not great. Not great. Um, yeah. Uh, even though again, so now we're gonna be getting into more of the episode, so got most of the Collie stuff out of the way this time. Um, you know, it's tough because it's obviously I see the issues that people have with the finale. Um, but then the way I look at it is that it's like, well, they're trying to frame it a certain way. So you gotta view it somewhat based on how they're trying to frame it, and they were trying to frame it as Kali being right. Um, whether people disagree with that is one thing, but they were trying to frame her as coming from a more realistic point of view than, um, than Mike was necessarily of their happily ever after, Three Waterfalls fantasy, um, and then versus Hopper, who again was saying nothing wrong at all about, that Elle has experienced so much pain and hardship in life that she deserves a future and a happy ending. That's absolutely correct. But there's also the reality of the awful situation that characters like Kali and Elle were ultimately born into. Um, we know Kali was taken from a young age. But still, ultimately, like, she was put on this earth, sadly, to end up in this situation, I guess. So it's like for characters like them, uh, there is a different, layer to the story. Um, so let me go back up here because I've been seeing a lot of discourse going on in the chat. Now that you've seen the finale, what is your ranking of the seasons? Yeah, that was something I was thinking about doing. I think I might do an official, you know, season ranking video now that everything's done. Because because even now, after the fiasco that was season 5 online, the internet discourse surrounding season 5, the fact that the internet has clearly designated season 5 as, like, the season that is cool to hate on right now. It's the season that is cool to call, by far the worst. It is that season. It is the punching bag season of Stranger Things right now. Even in the midst of all of that, even with the internet granting everybody the permission to consider season 5 to be the worst, if you look up the new season ranking videos here on YouTube, look it up, just say, see, Stranger Things seasons ranked, and check out the most recent ones, posted in the last day or two of people doing their final rankings now that everything's done. I don't want to say it's 9 times out of 10 anymore, but probably maybe 7 times out of 10 now. Season 2 is still dead last for people. It's like it's like at this point, I just have to laugh. Like at this like, you know what I mean? Like I've gotten to the point where it's like I have said my piece on this season. Now that season 5 is done, I think the season made it incredibly clear how important season 2 is to this show, how important it is to the characters, to the lore, to the emotion, to so much. Like it really is, along with season 1, of course, the blueprint and the peak, like honestly. Uh to me. But even the Duffers did say season 2 most important season. And so now that all of that is said and done, it's like there's nothing else you can say. And as I almost sort of predicted in my season 2 video essay, like in the epilogue of that, I said that once all is said and done and the dust settles, right, and that eventually, probably years from now, when everybody reevaluates the show, that season 2 will finally get the recognition and respect that it deserves, but right now it is just that season that is just doomed to be overlooked, taken for granted, extremely underrated, um, and that's just unfortunately its fate right now, but I have at this point, I have no doubt that years and it's sad, but it is probably going to take years, because right now everybody is still so into, you know, the discourse surrounding season 5 and just, we're too close to the thing still being new and only just ending that, people still haven't really taken a step back to look at the full picture and really, um, reevaluate exactly what happened, season to season and weigh the importance and, the quality as well. Um, but, I have no doubt that years from now, season 2 will finally get its flowers and respect and recognition, and it's probably gonna become that season that becomes, like, the cool one to like because it's the one that, people talk about the least, that people probably rewatch the least, the season that gets you know what I mean? Like, it just gives me that feeling of, like, that's gonna be the season that becomes, like, the hipster season to think is, like, the best season of the show eventually. And it's like, I can see the future. I can see it. Right? And so that's not where we're at yet. Unfortunately, it's gonna take some time, but I think season 2 season 5 made it very clear how important season 2 is to the show and the fact that it is in a lot of ways like the peak, like because so much of what they introduced in season 2 we just kind of just got, like, more of in the following seasons, um, and yeah, there's more to talk about there, um, but it is still so crazy to me to click on to these ranking videos, these new ranking videos, and still see, even after this, even after everybody's been granted permission to rank season 5 dead last, uh, that season 2 is still at that position for people. Um, that there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. Um, I have seen slight variations. Like I said, maybe it's 7 times out of 10 now that you're gonna find season 2 last, but, um, I have seen 5 coming in last now. I saw 3 come in last once, but other than that, it's 2 still. I can't. But to answer your content fixes question, uh, that now that I have seen the finale, what is my ranking, from best to worst or favorite to least favorite? It would be 2, 1, 5, 4, 3. Um, it could have been worse, but it could have been better. That's my feelings toward the finale. Yeah, I can see that. Mike and 11 stands hate Kali now. Yeah, I know. But people were always going to latch on to any reason they could to hate her. And like I said, they're saying, she's the reason Elle's dead. Whatever, whatever, we hate her. Again, now that I know how it ends, there's nothing you can do anymore. So um At least these guys did something Game of Thrones season 8 didn't. These guys didn't screw up the ending as much as volume 2 was kind of a dud the finale delivered. I agree, and I'll go into why I think that is once I catch up with these comments here. Um, why wouldn't you care about someone held captive by the military? Kali gets held captive by the military against her will. What more does she need to do to gain your sympathy? I know. It's sad. Do you think Robin broke up with Vicky? Uh, right? I mean, that's something that I think I've seen people point that out as being a little bit weird of, why go through the effort of integrating Vicky into the group just to have nothing to do with her in the epilogue, like, to not even mention her at all in the epilogue, it seemed kinda weird. It seemed a little bit weird of, like, why, push this character into the story, why, build up this date that, uh, Robin and Vicky needed to make at Enzo's, and then not have them also be there in the epilogue with Joyce and Hopper. Like, the least they could have done is, like, maybe after we got Joyce and Hopper at Enzo's, like, pan the camera over and at least, like, show Robin and Vicky at Enzo's too, just, like, laughing and eating together or something. Like, just something, because that is a little bit weird that, like, they, um, planted that idea of Robin needing to take Vicky on this date and everything, and then that having no payoff whatsoever, you know, and not even mentioning Vicky in the epilogue. Like, that is weird. That is weird. So do I think they broke up? I mean, the fact that she was not present, maybe, maybe. And it is weird. Because they also had Robin say something about like overbearing significant others. Um, I don't know if she was describing Vicky there or what, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they stayed together. It's seeming like they probably didn't, which again is a strange choice considering how much they tried to push her into the story only to go nowhere with that. Bushman Studios, as a Kali fan, I was more angry about her death than sad because she felt like a scapegoat for the Duffers to want to kill someone. Yep, and I have said that before, she was the scapegoat of season 2 of, like, the thing that people blamed, season 2 for being bad on, and that's, by the way, that's still the reason why people are ranking season 2 last, even though everything is done now and season 5 was, went down the way it did on the internet, people are still saying that season 2 is last because of the Lost Sister episode, and it's like, I can't. I can't. Um, but yeah, so she's the reason why people tried to say season 2 is bad, and now a lot of people were blaming season 5 on her too, saying that she ruined another season, that she's cursed and whatever. There was all that rhetoric. And then, yes, ultimately when she died, no one cared because she was already a hated character for no real good reason, as we've been over. Um, but yeah, and so again, going back to the things I said at the beginning of the chat, if they had just made those few changes, it would not have gone down that way for her with audiences. I saw Kali as misguided. She needed to decide who to side with. This was my conclusion before volume 2. Yeah, who cares if they like it? If people cannot understand that Kali had the worst life ever, nothing will make them understand that. Yeah. Um, Uh, it doesn't matter if Kali is right or wrong. The facts that this was all brought into the kids' lives by them meeting Elle, so for it to stop, Elle had to leave their life. Yeah. My dislike for the finale has nothing to do with Elle dying. Kali was right in my eyes. It's just how they made the entire show inconsistent with that ending. Yeah. Right. Anyway, I'm gonna read through some of these. Hot take, I feel like season 5 wasn't as death heavy, and that's the main reason why it was mid. The only deaths in the seasons were Kali, L question mark, and Vecna. There wasn't any hard-hitting deaths. Um, someone says their ranking is 4, 3, 2, 1, 5. Um, my problem with the finale was the final battle. Um Crazy Dave says 2, 1, 4, 3, 5 for their ranking. Um, the pressure for 5 to be better than 4 was nearly impossible. Um, Joey Triant says 1, 2, 4, 3, 5 for their ranking. All of these, all respectable. All respectable. Uh S Riva says 4, 3, 5, 1, 2. In my opinion, not respectable. No, I'm kidding, but still, it gets me. It gets me when I see 2 ranked last. I'm sorry. Uh, your content fix says my ranking 5, 3, 2, 4, 1. I'm assuming is that worst to best or then, because you say actually 1 and 4 are tied because 1 started it all and 4 because of that epic emotional scale. Okay, so you said worst to best. All right. I'm not a season 5 hater, by the way. Just felt very different in terms of pacing. 4 is the best hands down, then a tie between 1 and 2, and then a tie between 3 and 5. Um, season 2 and 4 kept switching up before 5, but now clearly from best to worst is 1, 2, 4, 5, 3. I might need time with 5. Yeah, I can see that one. I take mine back. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, literally in release order. Um, I love Holly, but season 5 shouldn't have been about Holly. If you wanted us to love Holly, she should have been introduced more in season 4 or 3. Yeah. Um, Kadia says, "Yeah, I really didn't like 4 straight after, and now I absolutely love it." Um, my favorite scene in season 2 is the go away scene. Brilliant acting. Um, I loved season 2 because it built the lore. At the end of season 1, I placed Will as a potential vessel for something. He was connected to something when he blipped between Hawkins and the Upside Down. Yes, and with the whole montage with the Clash communicating with Will. Yep. I saw someone tweeting how the show would be a perfect example of the MCUification of Hollywood. And since that, I can't unsee how 1 and 2 are a different show to 3 onwards. That's what I'm saying, like, it is crazy if you were to look at the final battle from season 5 and compare it to anything from seasons 1 and 2. It is night and day, and it is almost crazy to think that it's the same show, that it became this, like, massive, CGI abomination monster walking around while 11 is flying through the air and, like, all this stuff. It is what it is now, but it is crazy to think that it went from just this very grounded, intimate, character-driven, small town mystery show to what we see in season 5. I mean, it is crazy. It is crazy, and that's one of the reasons why I love season 2 and think it's very much like peak because it got bigger without being extremely unreasonable. You know what I mean? Like, for the kind of show that it started as, you know what I mean? It got just big enough that it still felt small scale enough. Like, you know what I mean? Like, yes, the Shadow Monster Mind Flayer was, like, huge, and the gate that Elle had to close was huge, but it was just big enough that it was like, "Okay, I can believe this," based on the world they established in season 1. Um, but then when you get to season 3 and you get the fleshy Mind Flayer in the mall and killing it with fireworks and all this stuff, which, the, endgame battle in season 5 very much felt similar to, um, that's when it gets to this point where it's just sort of like it's becoming something else. Um Season 2 is good. I miss the shadowy version of the Mind Flayer when it represented existential dread. Yeah, exactly. Um, agree with Brit, it is definitely 21543. Thanks. And yeah, I think I might do a video, going into why, I would go with that, and from what I've seen, my video would be the only one to put season 2 at number 1 so far. But, that's life. Season 3 was great to me because it was a preview of not just the Flayer, but Billy as a vessel. At that point, I knew Will had to play a bigger part. Um, 43215 is another ranking here. Um, Season 3 is not a season of TV, it's a summer blockbuster movie. I wish there was a way to show it without the episode breaks and realize it's one movie. You can't really judge 3 as a season. Um, yeah. Stranger Bird says, "I love that Murray bonded with Mr. Clark after losing Alexei." Um, Bannon says, "3 was the worst for me because it felt so different from the first 2 seasons and it was a bit jarring." Agreed. Um, because of my theory, though, season 5 disappointed me after Vecna's death. The flare would transfer to Will since he's linked to it too, and then the final battle begins. Blades of Munch is here, said, "Oh my god, I slept in for like missed 40 plus minutes of this. Hello from New Zealand. Hello." Um, it's hard to rank them because none of them are bad, just less good for sure. 1, 2, and 4 are my favorites. That's from 80s Kid. Um, people should have rewatched the show before 5. If you rewatch the show, you'll see that in all the seasons, the characters sit around and come up with plans. People act like that came out of nowhere. I think the difference was, with season 5, uh, they came up with plans in almost, like, every episode. I think that was the difference. I think it was, like, every other episode or so, they were coming up with another plan and executing that plan and then coming up with another plan and then executing that plan and then coming up with the big final plan. Whereas I think before there would it was more so of like uncovering a mystery for most of the season, and then by the time you get to episode 7 or 8, depending on how many episodes are in the season, um, that is when they actually start to formulate their big end plan based on everything they've learned up to that point. And so I think that's the difference. I think season 5 had, like, too many plans going on. Ah. Even when it comes to photography, it's so different. It's kind of my heartache with the final. Yeah. To be fair, season 3 wasn't MCUification enough. All that started with season 4. I think season 3 marked, um marked too much of a difference in multiple ways, right? So the tone, the ushering in of just so much comedy, that's very much an MCU kind of thing of like the way the MCU has all the sarcasm, like, and nothing can be too serious. Like that sort of started with season 3 of like everything's kind of a joke now. We're not really taking the show as seriously as we did in the first 2 seasons. Things are a lot more far-fetched in the sense of like this big um physical meaty villain, and the action was ramped up a ton, you know, that really yeah, like season 3 really did mark, a shift there, and then, um, certain aspects of the show was never really able to shake. In season 4, there was still a lot of it sprinkled in, um, and then season 5, there wasn't as much, but there is still, we got, like, Derek and, um, a couple other things and a couple other, bits of dialogue here and there that feel very, like, MCU-ish, and I feel like I've seen some people try to say that all of that started with season 2, and I think for me, I have to disagree because I'm not a big MCU person, right? Um, I can't get into it, so the fact that I love season 2 as much as I do makes me think that that cannot be true. You know? Um, but I was actually talking to my friend about this, and, um I compare it if we're gonna, like, talk about MCU and stuff, I would say, and this is stuff that I've talked about on my channel before in my Spider-Man video essay, is that seasons 1 and 2, to me, are like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, right? And then seasons 3, 4, and 5 are like Tom Holland's Spider-Man to me. If you were to, like, compare, like, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind like, because I feel like that's kinda perfect, like, think about it, it's like the perfect example of, like, it's the same it's they're movies that are telling similar kind of enough stories about the same character, right? Spider-Man, Peter Parker, but the approaches are so different, and, like, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man feels like a very, like, it is very comic booky and campy at times, right? But there is ultimately this very, like, pure, tangible, grounded, emotional, like, personal feeling to those movies, especially, Spider-Man 2 for a lot of people. That's, like, such an introspective, like, you know, great movie, considered like one of the best sequels ever. And I have honestly, I've compared the first 3 seasons of Stranger Things to um Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. Like it lines up perfectly for me in my own personal opinion. Um like except Spider-Man 1 is my favorite Spider-Man movie of the Sam Raimi trilogy. Um so it doesn't perfectly line up that way for me, but still I'll explain it real quick because I think this is I don't think this is something I've ever shared on here. So like season 1 is like in comparison to where the show ends up, right, is like a little bit scrappier. It's like this really raw first installment that could also stand on its own as just like this one story, and it kinda tells you everything and gives you so much, and it's emotional, and it's, it's it is what it is, and it's, 80s homages and everything, and it's just this perfect little gem of a thing that sort of changed a lot of, the future of TV and the streaming era and, was just, like, super influential, right? That is akin to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 1. It was, Spider-Man's first time on the big screen like that. It was also a very, um like I said, it feels very scrappy when you look back at it, and it's very raw in its storytelling, and, it's very character driven, and it just it gives me that sort of diamond in the rough, like, vibe, right? And it was also extremely influential, like, we wouldn't have a lot of the superhero movies we have today if it wasn't for the success of, how successful, um that first Spider-Man movie was. Um, and so there's that comparison where I'm like, "Yep, I could see, like, Stranger Things 1 and Spider-Man 1 being, like, similar like that." Then for me personally, even though Spider-Man 2 isn't my favorite Spider-Man movie, this is how I view it though, like, the the general public considers Spider-Man 2 to be, like, this revered sequel that's just, like, the peak of, like, superhero movies. It's just, like, so good. It took everything about the first movie and just, like, made it better and went deeper with the characters and went deeper with whatever. That's season 2 for me. You know what I mean? Season 2 took everything about season 1 and made it better, and it went deeper with the characters. It even has a villain with tentacles, right? Spider-Man 2 has Doc Ock. Stranger Things 2 has the Mind Flayer, right? There's, like, little similarities there too, but it really is. It's like this thing that just took what worked and just expanded upon it and also went deeper with the emotion and the character. Um, and so that's that comparison, especially for me. Like, I think season 2 is the peak of the show, and general public, Spider-Man 2 is, like, revered. So that's that comparison to me. Then you get to Spider-Man 3, right? Which is known to be this movie that just kinda went off the tracks, like, lost sight of, what Raimi was doing there. There was a lot of, like, studio interference, I wanna say, of them being like, "Okay, we need more fight sequences, we need more, like, action." There was a lot more CGI going on in, Spider-Man 3. There's musical moments in Spider-Man 3, right? We had the Never-Ending Story in season 3. It's just like it is so similar in the fact in the sense of, like, it just got so much bigger, and Spider-Man 3 had, like, way more, like, silly comedy too, it's there's something to be said. There is something to be said. It is very similar in those ways, the trajectory of the first 3 seasons of the show and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. Um, and so And, like, there being, like, a lot of villains too, right? Season 3 has the meat flayer, the Russians, Grigori, who is one of the Russians, but he's kinda like his own thing. Um, wasn't there, like, one other one or something? I can't remember, but anyway, um, yeah, I've been sitting with that comparison for quite some time now, so seemed like a good moment to to share it. Uh, but yeah, I think there's a definite, like, parallel between those 3 installments of each franchise. Uh, but yeah, but back to what I was saying about how, like, seasons 1 and 2 are like the Sam Raimi Spider-Man, and then 3, 4, and 5 are more like the Tom Holland Spider-Man, like, bigger in scale, they're a lot shinier as to as far as, like, production value, um, but in a lot of ways, they feel a little bit more hollow. Like, I love a lot of the stuff that they did with the Tom Holland movies, specifically, like, in No Way Home. But there is ultimately a difference. There's a difference to the approach of storytelling, to the filmmaking. One seems, like I said, a lot more original and intimate in the way it was crafted, and then the other one seems a lot more, calculated, I guess maybe is the word, which makes them feel a little bit more distant and cold to me, like the Tom Holland movies, and and that's kinda how I feel about seasons 3 through 5 of Stranger Things. Um, would Tales of '85 be the Spider-Verse movies then? Hey, yeah, maybe, and we'll see how that show turns out. If it's, like, really, really good, then yeah, probably. Um Season 3 went all out aesthetically, like what someone that wasn't born in the '80s thinks of the '80s. Hmm. I thought the show would set up the showdowns like this: Collie and Hopper versus the lab, 11 versus 1, Will versus the Mind Flayer. I thought it was going to end with everyone confronting their villains. Yeah. Again, I think that the ending, uh, with Joyce being the one to do the final blows to Vecna very, um was a very good choice, and I loved them showing all the moments, uh, zooming in on each character and showing how they've been affected by Vecna and the Mind Flayer personally. Um, although I do think it is interesting, people have pointed out, you know, why was Will not feeling pain, when Vecna was getting his head chopped off, you know what I mean? Was it because the Mind Flayer was already defeated? But then you wonder again, why didn't Will die when the Mind Flayer died if he was still so connected to it? You know? Like, I don't know how that logic works. Is it like, you know what I mean? Because remember in season 2, they established if the brain dies, the body dies. Will's a part of the army, so he'll die. Obviously, he wasn't, like, flayed in the same way he was in season 2 in season 5. It was just sort of like his connection to it based off everything he's experienced, I guess. So maybe that's why he didn't die because he wasn't, like, actively flayed, but it still seemed a little weird that he wouldn't have even been feeling any pain, like, when Vecna was impaled, why was Will not like, "Ah!" Like, you know what I mean? Like, because in that moment, when he was tapping into him enough to rip his arm, um, maybe his arm shoulda hurt too? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, I don't know. A little bit inconsistent there. And then while the head was getting chopped off, I feel like he probably should have been screaming too, uh, instead of, standing there perfectly fine watching him die. Um, who knows? Who knows? Um, Stranger Things 1 and 2 are High School Musical 1 and 2, 3 through 5 are High School Musical 3 derogatory. I've seen a lot of people in recent years come around to High School Musical 3 actually. Um, I would say High School Musical 2 is actually my least favorite because it felt the least like High School Musical because they were on summer vacation and there was no musical. But but I could see that just as far as like, High School Musical 3 went a lot bigger, it was a theatrical release, it was shinier, all that stuff. Spider-Man 2, 2004 is goated, Spider-Man 2 is like Stranger Things 2, I agree. Um, Season 3 was interesting, I loved the vibe and the visuals, but I wasn't a big fan of the story for some reason, but I don't have a big problem with it, I think season 4 is much more coherent. Um, Something you didn't mention, season 1 and 2, they were kids. I think by them being little kids was such a huge appeal to the show. By season 4, Lucas was already looking like an adult. Yeah. Um, when it's life and death and you're going to sit and stop and sing, that was cartoonish to me. Yeah. Billy as the vessel was the MVP of season 3 for sure. Nancy's bosses were the other villains. Yeah. Yeah, there was just a lot, you know what I mean? There's, like, a lot going on, and it kinda just you could compare it to Spider-Man 3 trying to have, you know, Harry's Goblin, Venom, and Sandman, and, like, there's just a lot. It's too much. Um, let's see. Jesus loves y'all, thanks. Um Season 5, definitely the worst, logic goes out the window. Season 3 wasn't bad, but definitely not my favorite. Nancy's bosses were the worst, but they were not the villains. They weren't, but they were I guess the Flayed could be considered villains in addition to the Mind Flayer, like, obviously, they're an extension of the Mind Flayer, but I feel like all of the Flayed were kind of physical villains, and then the physical Meat Flayer, and the Russians. And Grigori as a singular Russian, as the little Terminator walking around. Um, it feels like they create moments in the show that they want to get to, and then everything else in between feels empty or repetitive. I feel like I feel like we got to that point. Yeah, that yeah. Joyce had 3 lines. I was so over it. In the finale? Did she really? Like leading up to the to the final battle? Um I say Sadie Sink will have the biggest career after this. Yeah, she's definitely, we said last time she's gonna be in Spider-Man. Um, did the Demogorgons just take a holiday? Yeah, and someone else saying, did the Demogorgons just, yeah, why was Vecna's lair not surrounded by Demogorgons? Uh, that is valid, and I think and aren't the Duffer Brothers, like, coming forward right now and, like, saying a lot of things that are kind of ruining the finale for a lot of people, where they're just sorta like, "I don't know, he just wasn't expecting an ambush, so" and it's like, "Okay, but that's supposed to be their homeland, right? So where are they?" Um, I also saw someone say, "Oh, the Mind Flayer likes it cold. Meanwhile, the Abyss looks like a hot desert wasteland that's, like, bright and yellow." Kinda weird. Um, there should have been a battle before the battle. That's a good point because Will's hand hurt in Vecna's memory of being shot in the hand, right? But then he didn't feel anything when he was being killed. Very weird. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he feels something from a memory, but then he doesn't feel something from him being literally murdered. Like, that's that's weird. Whenever Will controls the hive, it doesn't hurt him. When the demos died, he didn't feel it. To me, the Mind Flayer isn't dead. When they'll do a reunion in 20 years, will feel it and will restart. Um, hmm. The mayor was also a villain. Exactly. So many in season 3. Yeah, the mayor was like a human antagonist as well. So much. And that's why I'm saying like there was so much that it was like spread so thin that it was like it was just too much to care about. Like when they're just jumping around and then on top of that, the tone is so just like we don't really care. We're just having fun. So it's just kind of like, all right. Again, I said upon rewatch, I will say that season 3 was entertaining, but now also that the show is over, it does sort of feel the least impactful. Um Aside from introducing Robin and setting up everybody geographically for season 4 and setting up Max's arc with Billy's death. Those are kind of the main things that season 3 did. Um in my opinion, other than like I think they say that the Mind Flayer was building all of this to eliminate 11 and also gain her ability to open gates and stuff. Um, you know, yeah, and her like losing her powers. But again, I've said before that like almost all of this happens in the finale, or at least the last 2 episodes of season 3. Leading up to that, it does sort of feel like they were just like killing time and having fun until it got to the point where they were doing the setup for season 4. And so I feel like for me personally, if I were to rewatch the whole show, I would probably just watch the last like 2 episodes of season 3 personally. Um, just because as far as just like the tone shift and some of the other stuff they did, I don't know. And they give you enough flashbacks. They give you enough flashbacks as well to fill in some of the character gaps that you might have for not watching season 3, like all the shopping montage stuff with Elle and Max, like that was pretty much like the main cementing moment of their friendship, honestly, was like they just keep cutting back to that shopping montage. You know what I mean? It's like that was what really birthed their friendship there. Um, and then obviously there are a couple other nice moments throughout the season. Like I can see that, you know, about season 3. I get it, but overall it just ultimately feels the least like the least like the like I've said before, just sort of like the season that sort of pushes the lore of the story forward the least. Um so that's why it would be last on my ranking. But that's not to say that it's not entertaining. Um, Apparently Joyce didn't talk until 40 minutes in. That's crazy. I love the Duffers, but they need to shut their mouths sometimes. Um, yeah, they're doing a lot of post-episode explanations. Also, I hate how the Abyss came out of nowhere. Up until season 5, everything was about the Upside Down. Yeah. Well, the Abyss, the first time we saw it was season 4, right? When Vecna was banished, that's where he was banished to. He was banished to the Abyss, not the Upside Down. I think we know that now. It was the yellow area with the rocks and everything. Um, what about those Mind Flayer particles left over in Russia? We know from season 2 that all it takes is an open gate to bring them to life, so all it takes is a lab to restart this whole thing. Yeah, and that was I said in my reaction to the finale is that it's like the Russians never came back in a big way. That is crazy. Like, I think it's it's very, very strange. Me and my best friend who looks like he just joined. Nate Music saying, "Ho, ho, ho, Chile, hello." Um, yeah, we were talking about how it's kind of crazy that, like, you know, season 3, the Russians were, like, the big thing, and that extended into season 4, and then they never came back around in a big way in the finale or, like, even a small way, and that they left, the fact that in that prison in Russia, they had all of these upside down creatures, they have the particles, swirling around, and they were trying to open their own gate in Russia too that we saw at the start of season 3. So so it is kinda crazy that by the 5th season, they were like, "Nah, it's not important. We don't need to, talk about Russia in the end, really. No big deal," even though apparently all that they still have all of that stuff. But I guess it doesn't hmm, I guess it doesn't really matter because since they obliterated the Upside Down, if the Russians tried to open a gate, they couldn't because the Upside Down doesn't exist anymore, so does it just not matter that they still have all that stuff? Because what good is it if you can't open a gate? Maybe that's why, I don't know, but it is still a little bit weird that, you know, uh, that now those 2 seasons there of seasons 3 and 4, we spend on the Russians and then nothing really comes of it in the end because the Duffers said that for season 5 and the finale that, it feels like everything connects, everything you've spent the last 4 seasons watching, it'll all come together except for the Russians, I guess. Um, and again, that's what kinda makes it feel like the Russians were really only there because '80s. You know what I mean? It was like, "Well, yeah, we kinda just did the whole Russian thing because, Cold War, '80s, but yeah, it's not really gonna come back around again in the end." Um, Also, didn't Vecna see into L's mind? How didn't he see the plan? He got a did he get a lobotomy between seasons? Ah! Yeah, they just used that for him to Yeah, that was weird too. They used that for him to just, like, come to the real world real quick and mess with Hopper in order to thwart Elle and Collie's plan, and then he just zoomed right back to the mind world? Like, okay. Um, I thought the particles in Russia died when Murray used the flamethrower on the demos. Oh, that's true, but they still had, like, the demo they still had the demo dogs, um, in, like, watery, like, cases. Remember when they, like, walk through this certain part of it and they're like, "Oh my god," and so, like, they had all these creatures on standby, pretty much. So, I don't know. The Russians have something to do with the play, but even that is very minuscule to my understanding. Huh. To be honest, if they didn't introduce Dr. K, the Russians could have been the ones to hold Kali. Maybe, yeah, and that could have been a way to wrap them into it again, and so, like, instead like, the Russians maybe caught wind of Brenner's program, and they are trying to create super soldiers now too, um, in addition to weaponizing the upside down creatures. That's an idea. Nate says, 2 whole seasons on Russia. I would have thought they might have made a surprise appearance in the abyss, naively trying to control the physical mind flayer only for it to go wrong. That was my prediction. Still wondering what happened to the demo dog that was in Joyce's fridge. Yeah, that was people still bring that up. To be honest, I think the finale was good when you learned about Henry's past with the stone. Although I have seen people say like it's just a rock. Like his history, all of the lore behind Henry was a rock in a suitcase. Ah. Australia with a big spider just killed me. Um, I thought the 1950s high school scene was interesting. The outsider Henry was the main baddie. What if when 11 comes back, she is perceived as the big bad since she's the ultimate outsider? Hmm. The end of Russians demo in 4, remember? And the Russians got all their upside down stuff from Hawkins in season 3. That's the reason they needed to go to Hawkins because they couldn't open the gate in Russia. True. But they were getting kinda close, though. Like, in Russia, there was the crack, like, the crack was opening, in that cold open of season 3. Um, I hate that this chat is coming up with better endings than what we got. Um, did they kill the women when they destroyed the Upside Down? I sadly think they did, but at the same time, they were already dying, from Kali's blood, I guess, so I know, but I do I do feel so bad when I think about that. These poor pregnant women just in the Upside Down, didn't even know what was coming. Suddenly, they're just obliterated. Ugh. I guess the demos in the glass were no use without the particles, true. But it is just kind of funny, like, you would think just, like, the way they said that, like, everything would connect, you know? You'd think that maybe they'd thread the Russians in some way since they spent 2 seasons on Russia, you know? It's just a little bit crazy to try to just not even comment on it. I think we got 1 comment on the Russians from, like, Dr. K, just saying something about, like, "Oh, something about the Soviets," and that was it. In season 4, the Russians said the particles went into the demos. Yes, the shadow is in them, I remember that, which made them come alive. Then the gang kills them with the flamethrower. At that point, the Russians had no longer had anything from the Upside Down. Okay. But I still feel like they maybe could have I don't know, they maybe could have tied them in somehow. I'm not saying I'm glad they didn't, honestly, because the Russian part is probably my least favorite, part of the show, so I'm kinda glad that it was over, there, and they weren't really involved in season 5, but I do still think it's weird. Um, who's your favorite Stranger Things character? For me, it's Steve Harrington. Yeah, I think, just, based on how much I have defended this character over the years and how much I've talked about her on here and everything, I'm gonna have to say Collie, honestly. But I love Elle, and I love Steve as well. And I love Mike, honestly. I think those would maybe be my 4. Um, and something is, like, ticking in my bathroom. I don't know if you can hear it, but, um, it's kind of annoying me, so I don't know if you can hear, like, tick, 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 tick when I'm not talking, but it's really annoying me. It's like the fan in there. I don't know, but, um will you discuss Tales of '85 when that comes out? Maybe. I'm definitely gonna check it out. Um, the military saw their plan, maybe they took the women out when they saw it. Maybe. I know, right? Because, there's a chance they might have done that and they still have Collie's blood even though her blood didn't seem to be working. Um, hmm. My favorite characters are Elle, Steve, and Hopper. I still feel bad for Barb, though. Uh It's weird that Vicky, Susie don't even show up or get mentioned in the ending. Yeah, I guess it was just sort of like the characters moved on, um, which again, it's a choice. Um, why did the particles leave Will's body when they burned him and no one else? Yeah, I also thought it was interesting when they um removed the vine things from the kids' mouths, and then they coughed up mind flayer particles. Like, why did the mind flayer just leave them? Like, why didn't they need to be, like, pumped with heat in order to get that out of them? You know, like, they just removed it and they just start coughing and it just comes out. Like, I don't know about that. Um The pregnant women did not die in the Upside Down, they had their kids. That's how they knew Collie's blood wasn't working. She discovered the women when she was first captured a year before. Oh, right, yeah, that was from a while ago when she found them. Hmm. So then did the kids die? Where were they keeping the kids? Yeah, but see this there's some questions. I know, right? Because they were definitely towards the end of their pregnancy there. But who knows? Maybe they did die. I don't know. Mike kind of got the short end of the stick in season 5, mostly in the background until the epilogue. Um, I should have been in the writer's room because I have a good memory. That's the thing with the ending. There are so many loose threads. I was so sure they were going to tie it all up. See, I don't fully get it when people say Mike didn't do anything. Yeah, at a certain point in volume 2, he didn't do much, but he did have the Turnbow trap plan and helped a lot at the Mech Z attack. Yeah, I thought Mike felt very much like early seasons, season 1 and season 2 Mike. I know it was hot in the abyss. We actually never got confirmation on temperature since Will said in the past he likes it cold. Um, right? And I was like, because it looks like a hot desert wasteland kind of. And as they were like walking around, it kind of seemed like they might have been a little bit sweaty, which which was weird. Which was weird if this is supposed to be the Mind Flayer's home turf, and it's like he likes it cold. It's gonna look like a sunny place. I've seen people comparing it to the "In the End" music video by Linkin Park, which is really funny. Um, I feel like Vecna should count as Kali and Eleven's father. I mean, they were both born from his blood. Yeah, I think that's ultimately kinda what they were going for. Um Oh, Susie mentions in season 4 that her and Dustin broke up after her dad discovered the relationship. Was it that they broke up, or was it that he just kind of, like, severed their contact? Like, she still cared about him. So, yeah, I don't know. So I feel like the night is still young of this chat, honestly. You guys know I normally go till, like, at least 3 hours. We're only at 1:35, which is crazy. We've talked about a lot. Um, but I feel like there is a big thing we need to talk about that is probably gonna take a long time, and that is the ending of the season, the ending of season 5, which was the ending of Stranger Things. Um, so I would start maybe from around the final battle. So I've seen a lot of online discourse about um the final battle only being 6 minutes, which the Stranger Things YouTube account did upload the final battle, and the video is just about 6 minutes. Um, and a lot of people are complaining about that, because, obviously this thing has been built up for years now, and then we finally get to it, and it's literally only 6 minutes more or less, and there's a lot of walking around in the abyss with no demodogs, no demo bats, no demogorgons, nothing, and it just seemed, um, too easy, I guess, and too quick, and I can see that, but then for me, it's just I'm always coming at this stuff, from different perspectives most of the time because drawn out action scenes and fight scenes or whatever aren't my speed. And so for me personally, if the fight was any longer, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it as much, honestly. If they spent too much time on the fighting, I would have been like, you know? But they kinda just got straight to the point and took it out, and that was it, and for me, I love the characters, um, and, that is what I love about the first 2 seasons, more than the lore, more than the sci-fi, more than the, whatever action was happening in those early seasons, it's like, I am here for the characters, I'm here for the emotion, and so I was personally really glad that they carved out a nice meaty, 40-minute epilogue, so that we could really give a proper goodbye, um, to the characters. That was really my most important thing. And I think I said at the beginning of my reaction commentary video, I was like, I'm really looking forward to the epilogue, to seeing how everybody turns out, or how all our characters end up. So for me, um, the priority, because like I think I've said before a little bit earlier in the chat, kind of, seasons 1 and 2 are just like, that's Stranger Things to me, right? That's the peak. And then everything else, for lack of a better way to describe it, is just like extra. Like, not saying it's bad, not saying it's, whatever, but it's just like for me personally, it's just sort of like extra content. Um, and so for me, when it came to ending the show, all I really needed was something that wrapped up the characters in a satisfying way and in an emotional way. And, as you can see from my video, I think the finale gave that to me. I thought it was really obviously very emotional. Um, I think it was necessary to take that time um to wind down and give us a decent picture of where everybody ends up. Um, and so that's all I really needed in order for me to feel like the finale succeeded. Um, so before we get into Elle's ending, which is a whole big thing, um, I'll scroll back up here. What do you think of Steve's ending as a baseball coach? He got practice in season 1 and 2. I think it makes sense, I think it's like, sadly, Steve Harrington was that character that kinda peaked in high school, and that's kinda it makes sense for him, clearly they established that he has a very good he's very good with kids, he enjoys, looking after them and everything, so uh, he's also a former jock, so, like, it makes sense that he would do something like that. That checked out for me. That was good. Um, and hearing the way he talks about his job on the roof of WSQK is just very much like very much, peaked in high school Steve, but, very passionate about his coaching and his teaching. Um, Will's coming out being longer than the fight. I have seen people point that out, that it's, like, at least around the same time, which is really crazy when you think about it. Because the fight to me, the fight felt longer than the coming out scene. The coming out scene, I rewatched it, and it doesn't feel that long. Uh, but I guess it was. I guess because maybe the fight had more buildup to it, like finding it, walking over there, all this other stuff before Elle even got there. Like the final fight kind of starts when she gets there. So maybe that's why it felt longer, but yeah, the actual fight is around the same time, which is crazy. But 6 minutes makes sense though. Think about it. They have fought Flesh Flayer in Starcourt in season 3, Vecna in the Psychic Realm in 4. It makes sense. They have cumulative experience. Yeah, they kind of knew exactly where to go and what to do. Um, but it is kind of funny though, because people are just saying like this is a literal ancient being, and they were just sort of able to take it out in 6 minutes. Like, apparently this thing is so ancient, it doesn't even know its true home or whatever. That's like a quote from Dustin in season 2, but that was more so relating to the D&D, characters, like, their way to understand it. But I mean, like, it's safe to say maybe that is true, that it is that ancient, and they were able to just roll up into this dimension and take it out in 6 minutes, but yeah, but they were armed with the knowledge of, like, they know that it doesn't like heat, they know all these things, and, um, and yeah, it was very reminiscent of the mall fight, um, which I feel like was maybe season three's biggest contribution to the finale, was, like, that the final battle felt like a callback to the mall fight. And that the Mind Flayer having a physical body was like a callback to the Meat Flayer. Um, and the roaring of it and everything. Um, I don't mind how long the battle was. I love how character focused it was in the end, especially with how fast paced the season had been so far. Same. Dustin's speech when he took out the Eddie shirt was good. Yeah, he fulfilled Eddie's dream there in the end. Uh, which I was saying, I was like, well, Eddie's legacy is definitely still being felt on this show. Um, but yeah, that was kind of nice. He did literally everything Eddie said in his opening scene. Um, While I like seasons 3 and 4 of Stranger Things, I kinda want a fan fiction that continues on from season 2 and has the vibes of the first 2 seasons. Well, apparently that's gonna be Tales of 85. Tales of 85 is essentially an animated spin-off of season 2. It takes place between seasons, uh, 2 and 3. So I am looking forward to checking it out, because of that. Obviously, I don't know how canon it's gonna be to the show because they're gonna be getting into all these other adventures and stuff that were not referenced at all in the show. So it's gonna be it's probably gonna be one of these things where you just kind of enjoy the show for what it is, but you can't really consider it to be canon that much, especially since in the trailer they've shown like other upside down creatures and stuff where like out in Hawkins where it's like, how's that possible when the gate was closed at the end of season 2 and this is a spinoff of season 2? Maybe it's because the Russian gate started being opened again, like under the mall. Like, will we know when they built that on that show? Like, I don't know, but it's gonna be worth checking out as a season 2 fan, I think too, because uh the character designs are all based on season 2, so very nostalgic. Elle has the curly hair, you know, Dustin has the classic hat still, and Will has that brown jacket he was wearing in season 2. Just like things that would take season 2 fans back a little bit, so I kinda like that, so I'm looking forward to checking it out. I'm sorry, but the epilogue was also a mess. We only saw Steve's life. The others was Tell, Don't Show, or Mike's Imagination. I feel so negative, but I was not feeling any of it. Yeah, I see that. Yeah, and that's kind of like them playing favorites there too, right? It's like, well, everybody loves Steve, so we gotta make sure everybody can see a lot about Steve's life. Um, but I think they told you a lot about a lot of the, Jonathan and Nancy's lives too, though, more so than the main kids, which is kinda crazy now that I think about it. Um, but I gotta say though, as much as we've talked about, show don't tell and uh, everything else. I did kind of like the way they did the epilogue for the main kids. There was something very, I don't want to say poetic necessarily, but like I liked it being Mike as the storyteller, giving these sweet little glimpses into what their futures are. I don't know, it worked for me. I don't know what it is, but it worked for me. Um, Here we go. Can make the chat larger this way because I was squinting, finally figured out a way to do it. Um, I'm glad they gave Kali a heroic ending at least. That was nice. Yeah, and again, we're getting into Elle's ending, which is kind of like the big topic of conversation. Um, Why did Steve's hair look like a wig in the epilogue? It did, it looked, like, big, but then it was, like, long down here, it was, like, a weird look. Um, um The coming out has peaks and valleys. The fight was so monotone and predictable. The final fight is the whole season. They're literally fighting this guy the whole season. True. Yeah, and so then it's like the final battle is basically just the culmination. It's yeah, like I don't think that needed to be. It's like how long do people want it to be? Like 15 minutes, 20 minutes? Like is that necessary? Like I don't know if that would have necessarily given it more wait, if it was just longer, like, what would it have been? Just, like, a very drawn out sequence at that point of just I don't know, just, like, coming up with different, ways to stretch out the action. I don't know if that what good that would have done. Um, Holly came out of nowhere and almost became the main character. I think the biggest indicator that Stranger Things is universe like MCU or it Welcome to Derry will continue. Hmm. After watching season 4, this end battle was kind of underwhelming compared to that, but I'm still satisfied with the ending. They played it safe and didn't F it up. The more they do, the more they mess it up. The show keeps getting more inconsistent by the moment, and it's over now. Let me move this microphone. Um, Will kinda outed Robin during his coming out scene. He mentions Tammy, who only Steve and Robin know about. Robin even asked Will not to talk about it. Yeah, but, like, no one's gonna he said that, and everyone was just sort of like, "Okay, whatever, no idea what that means," but clearly it means something to him, and we're not gonna question it. Um Epilogue didn't need to be 45 minutes, 20 minutes would have done, I believe. I disagree. I really liked I personally liked the epilogue more than the first half of the episode. The first half of the episode was good and it was exciting as you saw in my reaction. Um, but then you can see that I stopped chiming in with thoughts and stuff after right as Elle and Mike are talking in the void, um, I was crying, and then that's when I kinda stopped recording myself, and then I didn't record again until it was over. That was because from that moment on and the whole episode and the whole epilogue, I was just completely focused and locked in and emotional. And so I definitely again, I think it's I don't know, it depends on maybe, like, what you watched the show for, what you prioritize, but, I was really all about the characters, so I really enjoyed that downtime of the epilogue. Um, I think the epilogue was great, true Stranger Things style, although the L story is more of Mike's coping mechanism in my opinion. But yeah, exactly, like, the epilogue felt like the biggest like a true callback to the feeling of the early seasons and just these I think they did try their hardest on the dialogue in the finale and the epilogue in particular. The dialogue felt much more in line with the way the show used to be. I love that they left Elle's ending up in the air for you to decide whether you wanted her to live or not. Um The Duffer Brothers have a hard time killing off main characters, they proved that, now all of a sudden, They have the courage to kill 11. You gotta be kidding me, yeah. That's why I believe Elle didn't die. The Duffers don't like killing people. Um, I kinda prefer the idea of her dying since it would truly feel like burying Hawkins' lab once and for all. Um, I have many issues with the finale, but I will say there are parts of the epilogue that are emotional. She didn't have to die, she just needed to get away from Hawkins and leave her friends. Um, Mike didn't get the painting or Will crying to his face. These people have no understanding of gayness. Will could have said Robin liked Tammy, and they would have thought that was a weird name for a boy. Um, I was crying the whole day after watching the finale. It was nearly perfect for me. Yeah, my eyes and my face were, like, so puffy that whole night into and I went to sleep at, like, 6 in the morning because I was up talking to my friend on the phone, debriefing about it and, like, going over the finale, like, going over Elle's ending over and over and over and over and over again, and then I just kept thinking about it and crying and looking on Twitter, and people were posting clips of that scene and everything on Twitter, and I just kept crying, and my eyes were, like, permanently puffy, like, they were, like, all the way out, I can't even explain it, and I was crying, there was so much salty tears coming out of my eyes that my eyes were, like, burning because I was just constantly wiping the tears, oh my gosh. But yeah, um, I laughed at the young adults saying they were going to meet up once a month, like, "Nope, we are bad at that. Yes, we are." Me and my friends from middle school, who I would consider, like, my close friend group from growing up, we're currently trying to schedule, a time to just go out to eat together, and that ends up taking forever. There's 4 of us, and we can never decide on a day. Like, everybody is always busy doing something, and it takes forever, and we're lucky if we get together, like, once a year. So it's sad, but I did think that as well when they were talking about that. It was like, "Yeah, that's not gonna happen, but it's a nice sentiment." Once again, the military plotline is poorly executed and suddenly forgotten in the epilogue. 11 got the Inception ending. Is the top spinning or is it falling? Millie practically asked to die, and to me, it makes sense. I do wish they could have written her an ending where she lost her powers. Yes, but they don't seem to have the capacity to write that. Um, that final battle with the Mind Flayer was less than 10 minutes. It was such a flattened final battle, and somehow everyone knew how to damage this massive kaiju without taking any injuries or losses. Yeah, we kinda went over that, but I wasn't too bothered by it. Um, so so speaking of Elle's ending, because this is, like, the biggest thing, um, so I obviously have been thinking about it a lot. I put some notes in my notes app here. Um Let's see. Oh, I made a note to say that they, recycled a couple of tracks from the season 2 original soundtrack, which made me really happy actually throughout it. There's a little bit of Soldiers, that song plays when they're in the abyss and they're about to, like, head forward to find the lair. I liked that. I don't know what the name of the song is, but it's the one that plays at the end of season 2, episode 8, right before Elle comes into into the buyer's house, like as Hopper's walking around saying, like, "Hey, hey, get away from the windows!" Like that whole thing, and get them all getting lined up. It's the dun, dun, da dun, dun, da da dun, dun, da dun, dun. That song, they had that in there at one point, and I was like, that was making me happy. Um, and there were, just a couple other moments that, um, reused some songs from the season 2 score, so that was cool. Um, so Alright, so as far as Elle's ending, um, okay. So I have read a lot of, um obviously, I've read a lot of the opinions, a lot of the discourse. My friend and I have gone back and forth constantly about it. He's feeling a certain way about it. Uh, he's feeling really emotional about it and feels as though, it could have or should have ended with Elle being able to, like, at least take off with Mike somewhere. Um, or whatever. I know a lot of people feel as though she definitely deserved, a life and a future, especially after the episode harped on that so much, like with Hopper telling her that over and over again. Um, you know, I get that, but then the fact that they were harping on it so much does kind of lead you to believe that they maybe were going to subvert expectations and not give her what they've been talking about the whole episode and a lot of the season as well, going back to episode 1, Mike talking about having the 3 waterfalls fantasy life, even back then in episode 1, Elle did not seem super convinced, and this was even before Kali came into the picture and started talking to her about, you know, ending the cycle. She seemed a little bit like, she didn't really believe that it was possible. But then, of course, you have Hopper telling her it is, and Mike, saying it, and, you know and this is when you start to break down, was it possible? Could she have had a normal life at any time in the future? And the more I think about it, there really at the very least, I don't think there was a future for her where she's not ultimately in hiding to some degree, right? Um, even out in Iceland, wherever she is, she is alone, in that story, and it's like it's a really tough one to wrestle with because, again, as I said earlier, you have to consider the way they're framing it, and they're framing it in a way where Kali was right, and that was evident by, as soon as they got back from the Upside Down, the military was there, ready to scoop Elle up again and potentially kill all of her friends and family there, just as Kali said, and just as she had personally experienced, right? And so that was the moment where Elle realizes that sort of reality and decides to make that choice. Because I feel like, there was a moment where she kind of almost wasn't going to do that, when it seemed like everything was resolved and they were in the truck and her and Mike were smiling at each other and everything. I think she was gonna, not go through with Kali's pact. Um, and then when they arrived and the military was all over them, that's when it was like, "Okay, nope, back to reality. Sadly, this can't go on," you know? Um, and so there are plot holes or whatever people are calling it in this where it's like, okay, how did Elle run to the gate at the Max Z that fast if the hedgehogs were on? Because we've seen how much it debilitates her, um, as far as even just being able to walk. She gets doubled over in like pain from the thing, and it's difficult. And she was right there in the truck in front of a soldier, when she got out, how did she go right past them and just zoom to the gate, you know? That's interesting. Um and you know, so that's why there's a lot of talk about, like, Mike's story at the end is the real story then. But then there's so much surrounding that about, would Kali have been able to live long enough to cast that spell, or, cast that spell to use her powers? Um, or, how far away is Hawkins' lab from the Max Z gate? Because they established, um, that Kali's powers, she can only hold the illusions for so far away. Um, but I think they did that. Mm, oh no, because we would also, in order to figure out how far her powers work, we would need to know how far they were in that scene in the Humvee from Dr. K's lab. We would have to know how far that distance was to know, um, Kali's limit for how far she can hold illusions. Um, so it depends on that. It depends on, how far away Hawkins' lab is from the Max Z gate. It didn't seem like it was that far. Again, I think another measure of that, is the length um of side B of Prince's Purple Rain record, because it starts with When Doves Cry and then it goes straight to the end of Purple Rain. So however long that side of the record is, um, was the trip from Hawkins' lab to the Max Z gate and then to the moment where Elle vanished was at the end of Purple Rain. So if we take a look at the length of that side B, um, all right, Nate's in here again, the Prince fan, my friend. About 23 minutes, by the way, is the B side of Purple Rain. Okay, so 23 minutes, Kali at least would have had to survive. Um, but that's after the final battle. So add at least 6 minutes. That was the length of the final battle, plus the whole time of, because when did she die? Just around the time they died, when she got shot. Just around the time of just around the time when Elle decides to hop the boulders to go up to the abyss. So maybe about 30 minutes Kali would have had to survive. Maybe. Um, I think that's probably reasonable. Um, that's probably reasonable, unless she was, um, obviously they made a point to show us her looking dead, and that's why Elle and Hopper left her there. Um, so I wonder, but when we see Mike's story, he says the sisters devised a plan, and that would have had to have been when Hopper left to get bandages. Who knows if that time frame was condensed for like how long Hopper was gone. I think in the show it was pretty quick. Not enough time for them to have really fully devised a plan there. But who knows? It could have been a condensed timeline there, and Hopper was actually gone longer to get it. And in that moment, that's when they devised the plan, and Kali, um, just laid there looking dead when she really wasn't. And then she was able to sit up and make these final spells as Mike says, about 30 minutes later. I don't think that's totally implausible. Um, and so wait, someone said the hedgehogs were not on. Every time they were on, we heard a sound in the sound design. Go back and listen. Yeah, I didn't think they were on too, but that didn't make sense because they clearly were trying to snatch up Elle again, and they had the hedgehogs, and in order to get her, they definitely woulda had them on. Um, and then at the end with Mike's story, he says they talk about the suppression stone and how she couldn't have used her powers, and then they show the hedgehogs again, so they were saying that was implying that they were on. Was it not? I don't know. Um, but ultimately, I think we gotta talk about the potential messaging, um, behind Elle's ending, um, because I've seen a lot of people taking issue with that as like, this character who has suffered so much abuse, so much trauma, um, you know, as Hopper said, life has been so unfair to her, and then in the end, she dies, so to speak, um, and again, they framed it so that it was her choice to do so because of her situation, and again, framing it as Kali being correct. Um, so there are layers to it, right? Uh, I think it makes sense that in that moment when they arrived back to Hawkins, which again, they could have written this another way if they really wanted Elle to be able to stay alive. My friend and I were talking about it. She could have exited out of the Upside Down a different way. There was the rift right outside of Hawkins' lab, um, that they came that they used at one point, right? So she maybe could have exited that way. So the upside down, I mean, to the lab and the right side up, and then went and hid somewhere, you know, something if whatever, because it does kind of not make sense that they would exit through the Max Z you know, where so many of the military have been stationed, um, or so much of the military has been stationed. So that was one maybe a little mistake they could have done if they, wanted Elle to live. But but then again, but think about it though, that way, but yeah, Kali would still had to have done an illusion because the whole thing, as Mike says in the story, is she needed to convince all of her friends and family and the military that she was dead in order to start anew. Um, so that still would have had to have happened. So she could have disappeared and then just shown up at the gate as an illusion, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, but the messaging, right? So a lot of people are taking issue with a character who has gone through so much abuse and trauma in her life to ultimately kill herself in the end. Um, and again, I say that it is layered in the sense that there are all these other elements of the military would clearly always be after her. Does she want a life like that? Um, the military could always be after her friends and family. Does she want her friends and family to constantly live in stress and fear like that? Um, So there's that pressure and that decision to make. Um, then it's does she want to live her whole life always knowing there's a chance that she could be found and taken and used to create more children? You know, she's said before, as long as she lives, Henry lives, you know, and their goal was to kill Henry. Um, and he would live on in a very real way if Elle did not die, because there is always the chance that they find her and create more. So, in that way, you do kinda have to think that it is the word that the Duffers used was inevitable, that Elle would have to die because, as she said too, you know, "None of this will end as long as I'm still here." Which again, what's the messaging? That's technically could be painting the victim of abuse as a burden for everybody else, and that they need to remove themselves from the equation in order for everybody else to be happy, and that's not cool, you know, I get that. Um, but the more I, like, sit and I think about it, it feels like there are more risks to staying alive. I don't know, it's tough because obviously, um, everything that Elle had was obviously worth fighting for, you know? Her relationship with Mike, her friends, Hopper, um, all of that was is obviously something worth fighting for, even if it means having to live in hiding. Um, and again, though, circling back to this like thing that I've said of sort of like season two, at least in my opinion, kind of being the peak of the show. It kind of like seasons one and two, but like it is kind of like they reached that's almost like the depth of the well in a way, is like all the stuff that we got by season 2, and then in the following seasons, they just sort of, like, reach back into that well and, like, recycle things in a different way, you know, constantly refer back to season 2, and I feel like now with the ending, we really have just kind of looped back to exactly where we were with Mike, uh, but in between seasons 1 and 2, and then where he is as a character in season 2. 11 is gone, she's dead, she's disappeared. He's still hoping that she's still out there, you know what I mean? That's kind of right where we've come back to. Um And, you know, don't get me wrong, because like, I loved that about the first 2 seasons, like, I love a good, like, tragedy, I love yearning, you know, so that's why I was, like, so emotional, um, and it is technically like a bookend and a full circle return to that concept, with her ending, but to that, I do say, for a character who in season 1 had only been part of their lives, you know, the boys and, you know, everybody in Hawkins, for a character who had only been in their lives for a week, and then she does a sacrifice and vanishes, like, okay, fine. You know, she was only around for a week. You know, we hardly knew her, unfortunately. You know, that's one thing. But after she's been in their lives for 4 years, maybe she deserves a better ending by that point, you know what I mean? Maybe we shouldn't have circled back to the original ending of her needing to disappear and, you know, die and sacrifice herself. maybe we probably should have gone a different direction. But at the same time, I can also see and understand the desire for symmetry with that and how that's sort of the inevitable ending considering everything else. Um, which is ultimately why I wasn't that upset about it as so many other people are, but also, like I said, the way I love a good tragedy and then lace a nice love story into that tragedy as well. I'm really gonna love it. Exhibit A, right? Exhibit A. Titanic is my favorite movie of all time, and I was gonna say this is how I was gonna make this comparison. I had it in my notes app here, that I was getting Jack and Rose vibes from Mike and Eleven, all the way going back to season 1. Um, and I wonder if this was, like, subconsciously on the Duffer Brothers' mind because um they have cited Titanic as an influence on the show more than once in the past. They just said that Jonathan and Nancy's big scene in the melting room was inspired by Titanic, and I could see that too. It seemed like they were in water, maybe on a floating table or something, and they had this moment. I can see that. But then they also said that in season 4, they did these dissolves from the Creel House, um, in the current day as like the, rundown haunted house kinda thing. They would do dissolves from that into the Creel House in the '50s, and they would call those their Titanic shots. I remember them saying that. Um, so and that's like in Titanic when they would do dissolves of the Titanic wreck into the wreck in 1912 and vice versa. So they've obviously seen Titanic. They have included it as like a reference uh in those two instances. So I do wonder if it was like on their mind at all subconsciously maybe when they were writing some of this stuff for Mike and Elle, because it really was paralleling it a lot for me in certain ways, which is also why I ended up really liking the ending, at least in the moment you saw how absolutely destroyed I was by it and emotionally moved, um, because it did remind me a lot of it. And so going back all the way to season 1, with Elle's ending then, she's quite literally on a table, right? Lying down on a table. Mike is on the edge of the table holding her hands, right? And they have this conversation. And he talks all about her future to her and tells her, you're gonna be able to live with us. You're gonna be able to eat all the food you want. Like my mom will cook you nice meals. You can eat Eggos and we can go to the Snowball, right? And she asks him, promise, and he says, promise. And even before that, he tells her, hold on just a little bit longer, which is an exact quote from Titanic. Jack tells Rose, hold on just a little bit longer, right? That's an exact quote. Um, and then Jack tells Rose about her life, like, you're gonna do this, like, you're not gonna die here tonight, you're gonna die an old lady warm in her bed, you're gonna go on, you're gonna do all these things. Similar to Mike telling Elle, you're gonna be able, like, my mom's gonna get you a bed, you can live with us, da, 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 this is gonna be your life, you know. And then Jack and Rose make a promise to each other as well, and, he says, "Promise me," and she says, "I promise." Um, very much a that was always very much a parallel, um, to that Jack and Rose scene in Titanic on the floating door, which is not a door for anybody who's not an obsessed Titanic fan, but, that is what we call it. Um That's what history calls it. Um, so there was that connection, and now with season 5, I was really getting Jack and Rose vibes again, um, with let me the read what I because I wrote a whole thing about it in my notes app here. So, of course, like, spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen Titanic by now. If you're, like, part of the maybe 5 to 10% of the population who, has not seen Titanic yet, um, maybe pause or mute for a while, I don't know, or skip ahead if you're watching the replay. Um, but if not, I mean, I feel like most people know how Titanic ends even for the characters. Um, but anyway, so I had said that this ending for Mike and Elle in season 5 very much reminded me of Jack and Rose in the sense that except it's, um, gender swapped now, and, um, Elle is Jack and Mike is Rose, and Mike's heart will go on, basically, and I'm a sucker for it. And it's like, this story where there's this character who comes into this person's life and affects their life so deeply that the person who survives will be thinking of this person literally every day, um, of their life for the rest of their life because that person meant so much to them. And I do not doubt that, that is going to be Mike. He's going to think of Elle every day, you know, and so I got that from it, and then also Jack was a pretty tragic story too, because again, I'm saying that, like, Elle is Jack in this situation. Um, Obviously not to the same level as Elle, but, Jack's parents died, both of his parents died. He was an only child and an orphan. He was homeless, right? He did not have the best life. But he also had this great talent for art, which in my head I was kind of, equating to like Elle's powers as being like her gift. Um, he also dealt with a ton of class struggles, right? He was constantly told like where he can and cannot go. Um, and there's that whole aspect. He was treated like scum and like almost subhuman by all the rich people on the ship. And so there's like that sort of thing, right? And he fought so hard to survive the sinking and made it so close, right? Um, and then we have the ending where he ultimately sees that the odds are stacked against him and that his main option is just like, "Okay, I'm not gonna make it out of this, like, it's not worth sacrificing Rose's safety by both trying to fit on top of this thing, so I am going to make a sacrifice right now and die for her," basically. Um And it's more or less the same sort of thing, um, with Elle. She makes it out, fought so hard to make it to the end of this whole journey, and then at the end realizes that it just seems as though her odds are stacked against her, that, it's just not in the cards at the moment, and makes this last minute decision to sacrifice herself for the people she loves so that they can go on, um, and that I think is where people take issue with it again because she had such a terrible life, um, and that's one of the reasons why I always felt bad for Jack too, because he had kind of a crappy life and had a very strong desire to live, um, but in the end, that's how how it ended up, Um, and and he was also very young as well. Um, I think only 3 years older, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 4 years older than Elle is in, season 5. Um, so there's all of that. So for me, it's checking all the boxes for me right now with, like, a tragic kinda story that I would like. It was really reminding me of Titanic, and then, um, I've also seen people point out how, like, Mike did not say that he loves Elle, um, after she says it, and that also happens in Titanic, except now it's the genders are swapped again. So Rose says, "I love you." Jack does not say, "I love you" back, and one of the reasons why is because, and this is when they're in their dying moments, by the way, um, Jack does not say, "I love you" back because he says, that would be like they're finally saying that they're actually saying goodbye if he were to say it back to her. And both Jack and Mike are big examples of characters that embody actions speak louder than words, in my opinion. I don't think there's any doubting that Mike loves Elle. you know, I do think it is a bit, at least for Mike, though, I do think it was a bit of a weird decision to have him not say it back, especially after, like, the whole arc of him getting past it and, like, being able to say it. That would have been a really nice moment, but at the same time, like, again, I said, Jack never said "I love you" to Rose in Titanic, but we know that that does not mean that he did not love her. Um, so it ultimately doesn't bother me that much. I think it is probably coming from a similar place for Mike of, like, saying it back right now is goodbye, and obviously he does not want that to be the case. Um, and yeah, so that's basically the big, Titanic parallel there for me between, um, Elle's ending and the ending of, season 5 there, and why it kind of worked for me because I'm just a sucker for that stuff. Um, but at the same time, I do see, um, all of the complaints and other sides of the story here and other, opinions that people have on it. Um, and, I'm trying to think, like, would it have been as satisfying if we ended up seeing, Mike and Elle together somewhere in the end? I don't know. Like, it would have been really nice, but I do think there is something about that weight of loss, um, that I think is, very profound and heavy, and, you know, something about that ending, I don't know, like, it really works. It really works for me. It makes me super emotional, um, and it does go along with, the kids having to grow up and move on, um, is the loss. 'Cause I've heard the Duffer Brothers say that, like, Elle is connected to, like, the loss of their childhood, um, and so would the ending of the show be as emotional if they didn't lose Elle and they were all just sort of putting their D&D books back on the shelf? Would that have been as emotional of an ending? I don't know. Um, maybe, but I think that because there was this massive loss and emptiness in the end, that's part of what makes it so much more bittersweet and tragic, but also just the way it probably had to be, maybe, you know? Um, and again, I think I think it was good that they gave you essentially 2 endings, you know what I mean? There is the one that is a little bit more realistic of, maybe she did die, that was her truly sacrificing herself in that moment, and she is gone, and obviously that's terrible, that's so sad, um, but still hits the emotions in the way I just described. But then it also leaves you on this hopeful story of like, maybe that's not really what happened. Maybe this is what happened. Um, and and I like that. And I also love, obviously, as a Collie fan and defender, I love that they gave her that beautiful moment of, casting this spell of invisibility and an illusion, um, for her to fake her death, um, because if you want to believe that Elle is still alive, you have to thank Kali, right? Kali is the only way that Elle could still be alive in Mike's story. So I love that. I do love that they gave her, um, such a sweet and, emotional and important role to play, at least, in the idea of Elle still surviving. Like, it was the sisters together, the sisters working together, um, that allowed that to even be a possibility. Um, so but then at the same time, on the other hand, people blame Kali for being the reason Elle is dead because she came along and started planting the idea of self-sacrifice into Elle's head. But again, the show clearly framed it as Kali being correct. So you can't really get that mad at her when it seems as though everything she said was coming true eventually, and would ultimately be the path of, maybe you'll be okay and you'll be safe for a while, but they'll eventually find you and take you, potentially kill the ones you love and care about because it happened to her, you know? So so it is just like it's this layered decision that had to be made. Um and again, it's a choice that Elle made, so, um, they're framing that as well as, like, her being able to make her own decision, and that is what she chose to do. Um, and again, this is a character that never really had many opportunities to make her own choices, and I also connected it, especially since Kali is involved, um, I connected it back to the lost sister, because what did she do in that episode? She left Kali at the end because she decided that she has chosen to use her gifts to help save her friends and family, right? Um, Kali says, "They cannot save you, Jane," and she says, "No, but I can save them." And so, oddly, like not oddly, but seeing the connection between that episode and the finale, um, even just with the inclusion of Kali is especially why I'm connecting those dots. Um, it's kind of poetic, I guess, in that sense if you're connecting it to that episode because in the end, she is once again making the choice to save and protect her friends and family. Um, except it comes at the expense of her life and sacrificing herself instead of, using her powers to do so. Um, but I feel like it always sort of comes down, and then again, I know people would argue that, like, okay, but that is like Elle is a burden, or it's her responsibility constantly to, defend and protect other people, and nobody's really there to protect and defend her necessarily or something, she sacrifices herself at the end of season 1 for them, she puts herself in harm's way to protect everybody at the end of season 2, that's always the way it goes. She's fighting at the end of season 4, um, and then obviously puts in this huge fight in season 5 only to have to then fully make the ultimate sacrifice, and give her life for everybody. And so I do understand the complaints about that, especially considering she is a character who has endured so much abuse. Um, I get it, I get it, I get it. Um, but I also get the other story that they're kinda telling. Um, and yeah, I don't know if that's all my thoughts. Excuse me. I don't know if that's all my thoughts on Elle's ending, but it's basically where I'm currently at with my thought process. Um, and again, I don't know how possible it would have been, for her to escape, or like her and Mike to escape, because if she escaped without Collie potentially showing an illusion, like the illusion would have that's what I'm saying though. The illusion had to have happened in order for Elle to have, you know, even a semblance of potentially a normal life, because people had to believe that she was dead. And that's the only way they could have done that. Um, because if she just disappeared and no one saw her die, they would still be hunting her. You know what I mean? And if Mike were to go away with her somewhere to Iceland or whatever, right? Um, the government knows who she was closest to. They would still be trying to hunt Mike. They'd be keeping tabs on him too. And then that comes down to, you know, if they ever do catch up to them and find them again, and Mike might get killed just so they can get to Elle, you know what I mean? So this is the kind of thing I keep thinking of, and I feel like that's probably what Elle was thinking too, about how, like, it's just gonna always be this nightmare cycle of just always living in stress and never knowing if a normal life is truly possible. Um, and again, it's sad, it's so sad, but I don't know. The last minute had it all, the end of childhood, the end of a great show, the end of an important period of our lives, not to mention the viewers who actually grew up on this series. Yeah, that's what I'm saying, like, for me, like, all it needed to do was really wrap up the characters in, like, a satisfying and emotional way, and I think it did that, I think it did it, heading back to the basement, which again, I predicted that that would be the ending. I said I imagined, like, a slow zoom out of them just, like, playing D&D, um, but close enough. So yeah, going full circle like that, and putting their books away on the shelf and closing that chapter. Um, I think also Mike looking down at Holly and her friends coming in as like the next generation, and just sort of watching them with this like face that looks very content but like emotional. Um, to me, it was saying, these kids are going to have a better childhood than we did, even though they just had to escape something horrible 18 months ago. At least there's going to be no more danger, and no more monsters they have to fight, and they get to have more of a normal and balanced childhood than they did. Um, and also it's like being able to see themselves in Holly and her friends, um, and Mike thinking back, how fast time has gone probably and just that it carries on, you know what I mean? Like it's really beautiful, and of course you have like that piano orchestral version of the kids song in the background, just so perfect. And again, I even though we didn't get to see in depth of like where our characters ended up, um I do like there's something I really like the way they tied it into, like, the D&D game of Mike the storyteller being able to tell, um, the story of how they all end up, and that I think all of that is real, by the way. I don't think that that's just stories Mike is telling. I think that, yes, he's telling the story, but they're also showing us this is actually real, like, at the same time, like, this is where they're gonna end up, this is what the future of their lives, are gonna be like, and so that's why, I do somewhat agree that Mike's story could be the real ending, um, and again, and that's why I kinda think it's perfect, like, you have the one ending that gives you that heavy weight of her supposed death, and everything, but then you also have the bonus ending of like, "Wait a minute, there's still hope here." Like, I choose to believe that, and it's plausible enough that it could be the case, and in that case, Kali also has a beautiful final role to play, and I love that. You know what I mean? It worked for me. I don't know, you guys. It worked for me. It kinda gave you both options, and I know that, people wanted something more definitive, um, but I don't know, I actually feel like this might have been the smarter ending as far as keeping the conversation going for years and years and years to come. Like, the first thing that I had compared it to was honestly the ending of The Sopranos, um just because of how, like, controversial that ending was at the time and the fact that people still talk about it to this day, and nowadays, it's, like, considered a masterpiece, right? Of, like, not actually knowing the ending, um, and you can come to the conclusion that there was really just one inevitable ending for Tony Soprano, and that's how it ended. Or you can imagine something else, and people keep debating that ending to this day. And so I feel like Elle's ending is definitely layered enough that it will be discussed and debated forever and ever and ever and ever. You know what I mean? And I think that was maybe part of the idea, and why they went with that option, and I kinda like it. I don't know, it keeps you talking, it keeps you thinking about it, it keeps you wondering about her and her fate and imagining, and I said in my reaction that it's like a creative writing, open-ended sort of ending where and I feel like that just kinda makes sense for the kind of show that it is. I don't know, but, um but yeah. It makes sense that the show ends with Eleven's death. They are showing us this chapter of their lives where something supernatural happens, and if she was still alive, the show would never end. It is kinda true, right? And again, the only way it wouldn't would be if she lost her powers somehow and she was able to just assimilate into normal life as a truly normal girl without these abilities. And again, if she didn't have the abilities, what good would she be to the military unless it was still somehow in her blood and they could harvest it to bring it out again, but, I don't know. Um, but it is true. Like, sadly, can you have superpowered people running around in Hawkins, Indiana, and have the story feel like it's over, you know? I don't know. I love the idea of extending the theory of Elle living, that Kali survived and left with her, and they're both together wherever they may be now. I know it is sad that Kali, after having such a terrible life, just had to die, but again, she was very committed to ending the cycle, so, I think that's what she had meant as well by, "My story was always going to end here." Because, like, whether she was shot or whether she stayed there when the bridge blew up, she was going to die either way. Um, but again, I do love that with Mike's story, she was able to do one last great thing by helping Elle. Um, and if you choose to believe that, you gotta thank Kali for that one, right? And I'm pretty sure they want you to believe that, you know? They posted that picture of Millie and Finn with the caption, "I believe," you know? Um, and the more I've been thinking about it, the more it does seem like her living is quite likely, um, because they also want to be able to stretch this franchise out as much as they can. Who knows if they'll try to reopen it someday? Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but I mean, the Duffers have seemed very adamant about this being the end. Um, so who knows, but I think I think it's a pretty good ending that gives you both options, basically. Uh, and again, I know people would maybe, they think that her character deserves something more finite or yeah, just, like, final. Um, but I don't know, I think there's something a little bit whimsical to the way they did it with Mike's story, and it really worked for me. I don't know, it really landed. And obviously, I'm gonna choose to believe that as well. But then, of course, you got the Duffers coming out and doing these post-episode interviews saying that they don't think that Mike is envisioning a world where they reconnect, that he just thinks she's gone this time. And it's like, okay, because since we are essentially circling back to where we were at the end of season 1 going into season 2, and the where she's gone and Mike is alone and everybody else is kinda moving on, um, he would eventually maybe try to find her or whatever, you know what I mean? He might have that feeling that she is still out there. He told the story, he said, "I believe," you know? So I think that he probably would eventually try to look for her or whatever, because he's thinking about her every day. It was a beautiful touch to have that photo of her on his desk, you know? Um, yeah, so I think that the odds could go either way, but some days now, ever since it ended, I'm leaning more towards it's more likely that she survived, and then other days I feel like it's more likely that she died. Um, but right now, I'm gonna say maybe it's more likely that she lived. Um, um, Yeah, you were overthinking it. I don't know. I mean, I think the way it was written almost is like they want you to overthink it. I might have missed it, but how would you rate both the finale and whole season out of 10? Mm, the finale, I might give it like I mean, just for the epilogue alone and, like, that final scene, I think the final scene is, like, pretty perfect. Um, and when I think of the finale, I think of that final scene, and I think of the emotions that it brings up in me and everything, so I would maybe give it, like, a 9 out of 10. Um, like, yeah, I don't know. And then the season overall, uh, I don't know, maybe, like, 7 out of 10, maybe? I don't know. Or maybe the finale is like a 9.5 out of 10 or something. I don't know what's holding me back from giving it like a 10 out of 10, but I feel like there were, I don't know. Upon rewatching, I like I said, I look more forward to the epilogue than the front half of the episode. So, um, the last dialogue in Stranger Things is, "Girls don't fart, and if they do, it smells like roses." Nice. Um Mike becoming a writer is very Stephen King, and I love it. Yeah, I loved that. I did. I loved that shot of him sitting there writing, like, it's really beautiful. I don't like how at the end of season 4, it looked like the world was about to end, but then at the beginning of season 5, it's fine. Yeah, and they definitely made it seem like they were gonna pick up right there. They were like, "We hit the ground running with action," and it's like, I thought it was gonna be fully post-apocalyptic Hawkins, not 18 months later Hawkins where they're kind of back to normal. Um, my problem is that Mike thinking maybe Elle's alive isn't a healthy way to grieve. He should have accepted she's dead, and her death should have been definitive. Um, I don't think so. I mean, again, I think the Duffers said that she represented, like, something magical to them at the time, so, she kinda seems like this incredible person where, to him, she's survived before, why couldn't she survive again? Um, and I think there are enough little things in there to make it seem as though her death did not happen, like, the heartbeat when it fades to black before it cuts to the epilogue, that was an interesting choice to put in there. I think you also hear like, another breath, from her, um, and then these moments where it seems like Mike is either sensing her or at least thinking of something again. I don't know. I don't know. And again, the way they've written it to make it seem as though Mike's story could be plausible enough. So, I don't know. And I think, like I said, they clearly want you to believe, I think, so. How did the show make you feel while watching? That's what matters. Yep. Hmm. I think people complaining about the finale being mid is just that they didn't grow up with this series. It was never about a mega fight. Um, someone saying Mike should just accept she's dead tells me you might not have experienced a true monumental death yet. Um, yeah, I mean, like, I don't try to think that my grandparents are still out there or something, even though they meant so much to me and I think about them every day. Um, but I think, you still wanna believe that their spirits are out there, that they're still with you somehow, and Elle being the kind of person and character she was, I I can see them still realistically holding out hope that she somehow mystically survived it, you know? Um, let's see. I don't think anyone will be talking about this in a few months because of how season 5 wasn't so good. Season 4 was talked about for a while, but that's because it was great and had great pacing. I don't know. I think for a lot of fans, I mean, at least me, the finale did work, I don't think it was an absolutely across the board failure. Uh The internet's trying to make it seem like it is. Um, but I think in actuality, it actually did work for a lot of people. So it's kinda like half and half. So I don't think it'll be completely erased from the canon of pop culture because it was so bad. I think it'll still linger enough because I think it did work for a lot of fans. Um, so And again, that's all I needed. I said all I needed was something that gave me, like, a beautiful satisfaction for the characters, more so than a big ending to the lore or the action or whatever. Like, that stuff mattered, of course, but even that turned out the way I had wanted it to and had predicted of, Henry and the Mind Flayer, being a symbiotic relationship and sort of needing each other, and, the Mind Flayer still ultimately being the big bad, though. That was my one piece of lore that I kinda wanted to come true in the end, and it did, so it gave me that. We got a cathartic moment with his killing with Joyce, and then I think the epilogue was nice, and it wrapped up everything for the characters, and that's all that I really could have asked for, so I think we're a group of people who like to analyze. We're not representative of the people outside of the chat who just watched the show and took everything at face value. Yeah, true. Um, and of course, I have seen tons of fans be completely pissed off by the ending too. Um, but I'm not sure what corners of the fandom people belong to because I feel like depending on your corner of the fandom, you feel certain ways about different things for different reasons, and I'm like, as someone who just enjoyed the show for what it was in those first 2 seasons and then enjoyed some other aspects that were able to sort of harken back to those moments in the following seasons, I just wanted something that felt emotional and conclusive for the show and the characters, and I think it gave me that. Um Exactly, Brit. An actual consequence, maybe Elle loses her powers for good, then she can live a normal life without being tied to the past. Yeah, but then, of course I guess the Duffers said they didn't want to take away her powers, so what's the other outcome, you know? And I kinda don't like that. It's like, she should be able to lose the powers and just live a life, you know? I don't know. Still emotional about it. I like how they sent off their childhood at the end. Again, no offense, Collie's death, I didn't really feel anything since she didn't do anything other than be extremely unlikable. Again, we talked about this before, she was kidnapped by the military. She was completely dehumanized. The fact that people think she has to be likable after that and not be able to earn sympathy from clearly being tired and traumatized, she has to also what? Be smiling and laughing and be, what I've heard people say, like a perfect victim, be like how people think she should respond. to her situation. It's like she responded in a very realistic way to to what she had gone through and how she had been treated, you know? The fact that people are concerned with her being unlikable, it's like, well, I'm sorry that she wasn't sunshine and rainbows and had a very realistic, more jaded view on the world based on everything she's been through. Like, sorry, but I think that that is realistic and worthy of sympathy. Um, if there was going to be a spin-off, I'd prefer a genre change instead of character change, make a dramedy. Yeah, the post-relief comments from the Duffers are not helping, yeah. Um, will you rewatch the whole show now? Um, mm, maybe I gotta take a break from it for a while. Um, but I do wonder what will happen, like, how I'll feel now that I know how it ends. How it'll feel like, rewatching the first 2 seasons specifically, um, and, how it feels with the context of how Eleven's journey ends and just how everything ends, and the knowledge of what the Upside Down is and all this stuff, you know? Um, it might be interesting, but I don't know, but, like, even I was somehow able to still keep seasons 1 and 2 in, like, their own little self-contained bubble upon rewatching, even with the releases of seasons 3 and 4, um, and it didn't really impact my viewing of those seasons. I was just kinda taking those seasons as they are, um, and it's funny too because season two's finale is ultimately really the only true happy ending, of all the seasons. Like, you can technically consider the season 5 finale a happy ending if you believe Mike's story, but it ultimately is very sad and bittersweet, whereas, like, the season 2 finale is literally a happy ending. Like, everything's fine pretty much. All of the characters have kind of reached arguably their best points of, like, the core of who they are and who they end up being for the rest of the show, with, like, extra growth for, like, especially, a character like Will, I'd say, um, but, like, everybody else kinda and I guess, well, Max's further exploration of her, but, it did at least just come to this point where everyone was basically happy. We were bookending with season 1 with the snowball. Elle, it's implied that she's going to eventually live a normal life, right? She gets the birth certificate. We're told that basically give it a year and then she'll be able to go out in the world and they'll give up looking for her maybe. She'll probably still have to be in hiding more or less for the rest of her life, but it was a happy ending for her, she was alive, undoubtedly. Mike had her, they were together, Lucas and Max were together, um, Nancy gave Dustin hope for the future, which again was really awesome seeing in the epilogue them, bookending with season 2 specifically of having Stacy come up to Dustin and now be, like, interested in him after what he did at graduation, like, that was cool. Again, like, all these little season 2 connections, they did all that for me. I was like, "Oh my god, oh my god," it was so nice, and, you know, even just, like, Dustin's mom taking the pictures was a throwback to, the Ghostbusters pictures, in season 2, that little montage, and the end taking the snowball pictures and stuff too. I don't think she took snowball pictures of Dustin, but still. Um, but anyway, yeah, it was just I feel like and I remember prior to the season 5 finale, some people were saying, "Hey, if the finale sucks or if you don't like it or whatever, season 2 is a pretty great place to end. And it's like, it is though, because I mean, think about it. The gate was closed. That was like the big threat at the time. Close the gate, gates closed. Elle seemingly has a nice future ahead of her. Mike and Eleven are together. They're happy. Like I just said, Lucas and Max, like everybody, Max didn't have to go through all that trauma. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's a pretty solid conclusion to this little two-part story they were telling that was also very the same in the tone and the aesthetic and still very much felt like the same show. And then I say the rest is just sort of extra to me. And then this now season 5 ending is, yes, the overall ending, but when I go and rewatch, I don't know if it's necessarily gonna impact it too much for me because I've for so long now I have been so, like, just actively considering the first 2 seasons to be its own little story, two-part contained story, so I don't know, but yeah, that's all I'm saying, and again, another reason to put some respect on season two's name, you guys, like, it's the one season that gave you, like, pretty much a proper happy ending with a little eerie tease of the mind flare, but it's like, who cares? Like, that's, like, whatever, that could just be tacked on to the end for no good reason, just like, "Ooh, spooky," you know what I mean? Other than that, everything's pretty much good. Um, it was clear to me that Mike didn't think that they would meet again. He literally says she lives out her life in peace. Yeah, but we can at least still imagine that there is the possibility, and Elle might someday decide to get in contact with him again or something. Who knows? Seems like I'm the only one on planet Earth who's not over the death of Kali. Yeah, it was very sad. It was very sad. You saw my reaction in the video. Ah. This season is an 8 out of 10 for me. 4 was just so good. Um, mm, listen, I love this show, but the final season slash final episode, I'm pretty mixed where I have positives, but also a lot of negatives. If it were up to you, what do you want a spinoff to be about, even though it's confirmed it's somewhat about the Stones' origins and time? Um, I really don't know. I mean, I think I speak for maybe some of the collie defenders that getting, like, maybe a little bit more of, like, I don't know what they could do with her, but, um, just when you go back and, like, talk about, like, a certain time period in a timeline, like, maybe there was, like, a certain timeline of her life that they could have explored. Like, we still don't know exactly how she escaped, you know, what her life was like exactly from the time she left the lab to when she met Elle, and then it seems like she was maybe captured soon after she met Elle, and then she was with Dr. K that whole time, maybe, which is terrible. Again, if that's the case and people are mad at her for not being likable, it's like, bro, she has been tortured for the last 2 years, 3 years, like, I don't know, but that's one thing, but we'll see how, Tales of 85 goes. Um, and yeah. I have watched Stranger Things last month. I loved Stranger Things, season 5 was so good. I didn't want Henry to be a redeemable character. I'm glad they didn't, but Will's talk, about him Will's talk to thinking Henry isn't evil but a victim is what I want. I love the finale. It wrapped up everything beautifully. It pissed me off the way they talked about Kali and Elle like that. God forbid they have a chance to live their life and discover who they are outside of their powers. Yeah, I agree. Feels weird that they, like, didn't want to take their powers away or, like, take Elle's powers away. It's like, why not? It's like she is a person, you know? Yes, he's been involved in too many horrible things up until that point. He's a serial killer. Yeah. Um, it threw me for a loop seeing the party as young adults in the '90s. Was it or it was '89, right? So close enough. Um, I saw them grow up and it felt like a snap of the fingers. I know. One day I'll rewatch years from now. Watched the whole series this year. Same. I just rewatched all the seasons, you know, in November, maybe, prior to season 5. So still very fresh. Um, Definitely gonna take a break from it for a while and then revisit it later on. Um, and again, I think a lot of other people might do that too. And I think when they do that, hopefully season 2 will finally get the credit it deserves, but as of right now, that's still not happening, which is crazy to me, but we already talked about that, and there's nothing you can do. Um, I firmly believe that there is just no way that in the coming years that Cream will not rise to the top and that season 2 will finally get some well-deserved recognition for everything it did. 1 and 2 felt like part 1 story, 3 was almost an intermission, and then 4 and 5 was part 2. Yeah, I can see that. I love how they subverted that he was going to be redeemed. Some villains are just evil. Maybe they have tragic beginnings, but they can still become full on evil and irredeemable. Yeah, me too. You could see in my reaction, I was worried. I was like, are they going to redeem him? I don't know about this. And then he's like, no. He like says no about fighting it. And I was like, yes, good. I'll be here in a year or 2 if you do a video giving your opinion. Please keep up the channel. Yeah, I'll try. Um, I'm gonna have to rewatch this. It's lunchtime here. Gotta go. Thanks for the live stream, Britt. Thanks, Blades of Munch. Um, yeah, I think I will put up like a season ranking video, maybe. That's an idea of something else to put up. Especially because I know most people are not gonna have the same ranking I have as far as, like, creators on this platform. Um, so definitely wanna put my ranking out there. Um, don't know if you know the game Dead by Daylight, but they're doing a collab with Stranger Things, adding Dustin and Eleven and Vecna as characters. I have heard about the game. My friend Lydia is a big gamer, and she loves horror and all that stuff, so I think she played the first version of it with, Steve and Nancy. I don't know much else about it, though. I'm not a big gamer. Um, I have loved finding you. Well, thank you. Yeah, you had a great reaction to that moment. After the first shadow, I was also worried they were going to try to make him redeemable, right? Because it was like, why focus on him as a kid so much if you're not gonna try to, find the human part in him? But they still were able to highlight it a little bit and show that he was, like, emotional and everything. But yes, making it so that he had willingly chose to join it was the way to go, in my opinion. Also, Britt, please do more analysis videos on this show. Yeah, maybe. Depends. I mean, I am kind of in this mode right now where I'm like starting to, especially now that they ended it right at the start of a new year. This was like one of the first times where it really does feel like we are moving into a completely new year. Like no more Stranger Things. It really does feel like a true end of an era. So I am kind of in that headspace where I'm sort of, like, accepting it and, like, moving on from it, but, you know, um, still kind of, uh, finding ways to put it to rest a little bit, and I think maybe a season ranking video would be a good way to do that. Um, but yeah, I am again, a reason why I'm also just happy with the ending is that, like I said at the beginning of the chat, basically everything I said in my season 2 video essay came true to some extent of, like, you know, season 5 made it very clear how important season 2 is. Kali came back. Um, you know, everything I said in that video still stands, and so I feel like I can fully sleep well because I have really said I have said my piece on this show for the most part, and season 5 did not necessarily it didn't really let me down. You know what I mean? It really kinda ended up more or less the way I would have imagined it going pretty much, um, at least in regards to, you know, the importance of season 2 and a lot of the stuff that I said in that video, um so I'm happy that, my video that I put so much work into, guys, like, it was like 6 years working on that. I feel good that in the end, that video is going to live on and will hopefully, um, you know, be there when, season 2 finally gets its flowers and respect years from now. Those of us, me with that video and all of us in the comments of the video in support of season 3, in support of season 2, um, it's documented that we were there on the right side of history before everybody else finally decided to come around to season 2. And I still s I believe that that will happen. Who knows? Maybe it won't, but I just feel like yeah, I just feel like for some reason right now, it's just this weird season that people just completely overlook, like, looking up the season ranking videos, like the new season ranking videos, people get so many things wrong about season 2. They're like, "Oh, the Mind Flayer was a much better villain, which is why I prefer season 3." And I'm like, "The Mind Flayer was the main villain of season 2, honey." Like, people think the Demodogs were the main villain, and it's like, "No, it was the Mind Flayer and the Demodogs." The Demodogs were like the flayed in season 3, except it's the Demodogs, and they're not people. And then season 3 is just more of the Mind Flayer and the flayed, you know what I mean? And so it kills me how, people give, like, season 3 credit for the Mind Flayer, and it's like, "No, no, no. Season 2 is what established that villain and all of the lore. Thank you." Um, but yeah. So, I think season two's future is bright, but we'll see. We'll see. Stranger Things is always the strongest when it focuses on character, and season 2 had overall the best character moments and character relationships. Exactly. Exactly. I'm not a big fan of spin-offs, but if they made a few spin-offs that were planned to only be 1 season from the start, I'd probably watch them. Yeah, I think someone said that, like, with this new one coming up, that, like, maybe if they keep doing that, like, telling different stories, like, basically start a new, like, Stranger Things anthology series, essentially, um, that they could technically strike the magic of season 1 again, like, every season, 'cause they're starting completely new every season, so possibly. Hmm. The implication in the play is that when you go to Dimension X, your blood type changes, and the early idea was that Henry got his powers there, but I think it's from the rock thing, yeah. Because in that case, all of our main characters have powers now or something, if that is how it was, or their blood type changes. Um, I'm pretty late, LOL, but do you think 11 is alive or dead? I feel like the latter is kinda too tragic. We talked all about it, so you can either, like, scrub backwards or watch the replay of the chat, but, I go back and forth. Right now, I'm leaning towards her more so being alive, but I also think that her being dead is also a very, like, tragic story that has its own value in that way of, like, truly being, like, a heavy, bittersweet ending, which I also do like that idea, but obviously, I also love the idea to be able to believe that she's still out there, so, um is Tales of 85 a linear series or like an anthology based before season 3? I think it's linear. I don't know. It's about the characters in between seasons 2 and 3 running around having adventures or something. So, it's probably not gonna be very canon because it doesn't seem like a lot of adventures, like supernatural adventures were happening because the gate was closed. So, I'm assuming it has to be I don't know, the stuff like the Russians having opened the gate again is what it's gonna allow some of that stuff to happen? I don't know. Does the Turnbow family ever get saved? I don't remember seeing them in the epilogue. Yeah, no, they never went back to them, which is another thing, kinda weird. Um, I like to think she's out there because otherwise that means Kali is useless AF. I mean, again, I don't think so. I mean, she was at least I think she played a crucial role in helping to save the kids. Um, and I thought that was a really cool scene. She at least did that, you know. Um, and I do like again, I say I do wish they gave her a little bit more to do than just try to tell Elle, that the harsh realities of their life, or of their lives. Um, because what do people argue about the lost sister? That a lot of the stuff Elle discovered about herself in that episode, she could have come to the conclusion on her own or some other way. And it's like Elle technically could have come to the conclusion that she had to die on her own without Kali telling her that. So again, but that comes down to me just wishing that they wrote Kali's character a little bit differently. Um, And I think they want you to believe that Ella's still out there, and in that case, if you are to believe she's still out there, you have to thank Kali for that. She's the only reason that that can be possible, um, with the way they wrote it. So, yeah. So, obviously, I would like to believe that to a degree. Um, anyway, it is getting late. My throat is starting to hurt. I've been talking so consistently for almost 3.5 hours. Um, I feel like I talked about most of what I wanted to talk about, like, in relation to Elle's death or death, and some of the other stuff, like the final battle and the treatment of Collie's character and, um, whatever, season two's legacy now. Um, I gave my rankings now of all the seasons. Um, obviously there's always more to talk about, but I can't let these keep going forever. This is around the time we gotta start wrapping up. Um, but yeah, I really wish they did something with Henry and Collie's relationship. In general, I feel like Henry completely moved away from the lab in season 5. Yeah, I assumed that they would give us a little bit more about their history, but they didn't, but I mean, Again, now that it's all said and done and it's over, it's like, what can you do? It's done. Prior to it, we could have all our theories and our hopes, but then however it ends up is the way it ends up. And you just kind of have to accept it. And again, like I said, I'd have my changes that I'd make, but at least as like a big season 2 and Lost Sister fan, like bringing Kali back at all is like pretty much I don't know if I could have asked for more realistically. So, the fact that they at least brought her back and gave her some sort of, emotional ending to some degree for those of us who did care about her, um, and a beautiful moment for Elle at the end there with her. Um, could I really ask for more? I mean, it seemed like an absolute impossibility that she would ever even come back, so, it obviously it could have been way worse, and it also could have been better, but in the end, it is what it is, and I think that final scene starting with the kids in the basement is just it's pretty perfect, um, and that's all I really could have asked for. I really wish they brought Terry back. It kinda haunts me that she's still reliving the time she lost her daughter over and over again. I know. And now that Elle is gone, poor Terry, does she even know that her daughter is gone, No. I don't know. It is sad. The stuff with Terry is some of the most tragic stuff. Um, yeah, they ended it brilliantly. Yeah, I mean, they really did. I mean, I think, they said that they always knew what, like, the last 10 minutes was gonna be, so I'm assuming that's that final scene of the kids and talking about their futures and putting their books away and the next generation coming in. I'm assuming now, yeah, that's what they had always known. And yeah, it makes sense. And I thought it was emotional, I thought it was fitting, um, and obviously completely wrecked me. You can see it in my video. Ah. I wonder if the idea of how they ended it was so good because it was a brilliant idea, or if it was what they had thought of in advance. Hmm. I think Terry would have felt it. Hmm. Thanks for the live. It was interesting to hear and read the opinions. Thanks, 80s kid. Yeah, so I'm gonna wrap it up. If there's anything more we wanna talk about, I can always hop on some other time, but, those were, like that's, like, kind of the main things that are, like, pressing, uh, on my mind, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody else's endings were it was fine, I think, again, you saw in my reaction, I thought that they really did it, and I thought that if anybody was hating, that they were just hating to hate, that they're just lying because the ending was, so perfect. Was your mom joking about not liking it, or was that her real reaction? Gave me a real laugh. No, no, no. She took out her phone and she was reading what people were saying online, and that's what she said. She, like, pulled up a tweet or something from someone that said, "Absolutely dreadful ending. I could have been asleep 2 hours ago." And that's when I said, "No, no one said that, did they? No. Then they must be lying." That's what that was. Um, but I love the way my mom misses a lot of things, like, I think you can hear her saying, like, "Why isn't she making him see something about Kali when she's lying on the ground about to be shot?" And it's like, "Because the hedgehog is outside the window suppressing her powers, mom, like, stay with us." You know? Oh, but that's kinda like my mom and I always had this dynamic and banter, even, like, back when we would watch The Walking Dead, like, she would always miss certain things, and I'd have to be, like, filling her in. Oh my gosh. Um, Not surprised people said that, way too much negativity, yeah. Hope your mom is doing great. She is actually, she went to the doctors, she got an X-ray of her leg and everything's fine, it's just a little bit of bruising, after she had fallen the other day, so that's good. We were worried that her poor hip replacement got, like, moved around in there or something, so everything's fine, so that's good, thank you. Um, do you believe? Yes, I do believe. I believe. And on that note, I think we will wrap up this stream. uh, thank you guys for watching. Again, I hope you enjoyed the finale. Obviously, there are, like, again, I said, there's so many things to talk about, and I think people will be talking about this for a long time. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Duffers opted to go the way they went. People think it's safe, but I think it was clearly somewhat controversial because of the responses to it. Um, so yeah, we'll see what the legacy of the show ends up being. Uh, we'll eventually see what season two's legacy of the show ends up being. But I definitely have seen the tide start to change for season two a little bit since ever so slightly, which is why I know, give it a few years, give it a few years, and season 2 is finally gonna be somewhat revered. Give it time, give it time. Um, but yes, so so thanks. I appreciate it, and I will see you guys in whatever my next video is, which will maybe be a season ranking video, which might take me some time to do. Um, I'll, have to write a script for that one probably, and sit down and film it and edit it and everything, so we know how long it took me to do the season 2 video, but I don't think a ranking video will need to be that long. Um, so yeah, maybe that'll be the next thing I do. Um, but yeah, we'll see. So thank you guys again so much. And I'll see you sometime in the future. As of right now, I'm gonna be heading back to work on Monday after Christmas break, and it's very, very busy for me. So I don't know how much more I'm going to be doing on this channel in the near future, but uh, I hope to keep it up to some degree. So, all right. Thanks, guys.